10 times a year. And it's a chapter model where the chapter lead for the area just knows the people, knows the environment, knows how to get people together, and it's investors who are looking at opportunities. And I certainly want to have one in San Juan. So anybody who thinks they qualify for that, I'd love to, have San Juan be our 4th or 5th chapter, where we also have already identified leaders for Miami and Seattle, Singapore, London, and Hong Kong. So we're moving pretty fast on that one. And I'm probably going to talk to Pedro, maybe talk to some other folks, people who are connected and want to see this stuff happen. But anybody who thinks that sounds like you, let me and Mariana know before the end of the show. Well, no, the cut the check is actually from the people you bring into the event. So, at any rate, it's an event. It's not a fund. So,
yeah.
Yes.
Now it's my turn.
Now is your turn, Roberto.
All right. So, hi to everyone. I know a couple of you, some very good friends. Like Michael told you guys, I met him 1 year ago. I'm a Puerto Rican, born and raised, but went out of Puerto Rico for 6 to 7 years. So, but I decided to come back because I want to give a little bit of what I can to improve the conditions of the island. Because actually, it's a romantic thing, but I believe that Puerto Rico is the next big thing. It's gonna be huge here. I believe so. So that's why I came back. That's why I approached Michael, because I also believe that blockchain is going to impact many industries, as it's already been doing, but it's just a startup, right? So I know that Michael is pretty involved in it. That's why you guys are here also. And he's also a big believer in Puerto Rico. So why not make a friend of Michael, right? So I have been doing a couple of things during the past 6 years. I've mostly been an entrepreneur. One of the things that I do is to help companies establish here on the island. We focus more on pharma. As you know, Puerto Rico is still a big house in pharma and biotech. So my company have helped many pharma companies operate better here in Latin America, and we have bring other companies to buy other pharma that are going out, so to keep the machine moving, right? So in blockchain, I think two things are very good to notice is that Puerto Rico has all three things, have all the tax incentive needed as of now to create a business ecosystem to make this happen. We need to improve in other things. There are always areas of opportunity, right? But we have some of very good tax incentive laws that have brought many people to Puerto Rico. Some of you are already on those tax incentive laws. And also, another thing is we have very talented people here. So not only educated people, but we are warm, welcoming society. So people are very important as one of the valuables of being on the island. So we have very good universities. We have software engineers coming out of Maya West. We have software engineers coming out of the Polytechnica. And we have another different programs of privately owned that are creating more people that knows how to code. And also when we have one in Piloto 151, and there are more coming. So the third thing is that I know that San Francisco, New York City, other cities have been into tech for 20, 30 years already, but I think the space is crowded. So Puerto Rico offers a new path. You could build something here, new. It's not gonna be easy, but you have the opportunity to grow something big here. So I think those three things combined makes Puerto Rico to be to offer something to people from outside to establish their companies here and to create that ecosystem. So we are in a special position right now.
Great. And Giovanni, you have certainly a front seat to all that's been going on the last couple of years.
Yep. Thank you, Michael. As many of you know, my name is Giovanni Mendez. I am a tax attorney. Handled about 300 Act 2022 applications in the last few years. One of which was Michael's a few years ago. That's what pretty much inserted me in the blockchain space. So I've seen the blockchain community here grow here in Puerto Rico little by little until what has happened in the recent months and year, that a lot of more companies have come here. What I see the blockchain or blockchain in Puerto Rico combining in, and what I'd like to see more is the wealth of knowledge that's being brought here, and obviously the companies are moving here because of the tax incentives, but they do need employees and workers or whatever. They bring their own teams right now, but as they combine with the local young talent, that's what I like to see. I'd like to see more of that. We already saw that happen with the manufacturing industry. In the 70s, there was a lot of manufacturing boom here, and although a lot of those companies left, whatever they taught their employees regarding supply chain and Lean and Six Sigma, that stayed with them, and that has been applied to many local businesses. You go get, find bread at Los Sidrines or something like that. Part of their success has been supply chain implementation to something as simple as preparing bread. So I'd like to see that happen with the blockchain industry here in Puerto Rico. I believe it can happen. Right now I have clients that are, let's say, attorneys or in mass tort litigation or whatnot, and they say, oh, now I would have come to Puerto Rico even without the tax incentives, because they see the talent of the local attorneys, and honestly, the fees and salaries they have to pay are less than what they would pay in the US. Well, hopefully I'd like to see tech companies eventually finding enough talent here where they say, I would have come here even without the tax incentives. So, I mean, we still have them, but.
So follow-up question on that point. I think one of the things that I hear from companies who move down here is, that the employee for life status that you have is a little bit more closer to European hiring than mainland hiring. I know that there's been a little bit of a change, but I know that when it went through a vote, which the government was pushing and the legislature pushed back on to have at-will employment, and we don't have at-will employment here like you do in most of the U.S.
Well, that's partially true. Only the amendment passed to where you have a 9-month probationary period where it's fully at will. But pretty much, after 9 months, if somebody is being an inefficient employee and you document that, you could fire them just as well. What you do have after 9 months is a documentation process, right? So, I mean, you can't be lazy about it. Properly document why this person's not meeting with the standards imposed to them. And then,
how about if the industry changes? Because you do have a number of, industries here, not just blockchain, marketing, that are cyclical, and you may end up having to staff up really quickly when, a big new account comes in, like an ad agency, and then release people. So that's why there's a tendency to hire contractors rather than full-time employees if it's not an at-will employment state.
What the law says is that within certain periods of time, you have to call those employees back in a certain order. So if if it was a furlough, you can let them go and fire them. If you hire someone else to do their exact same position, then they can come and request damages. But if not, if it was an efficient employee and you want to hire them back, you can do that. So some technicalities to navigate around, but it's not, it's not to the point where it's impossible or whatnot.
Yep. Do you see that changing in the next few years? Because I know that that was a big contention thing, because obviously the party in power now is the one that wants to be a state, and almost all the other states operate on different rules.
I think they've taken it as far as they can for the near future in the changes they already implemented.
Okay.
There's reduction of benefits, reduction of holidays, reduction of Christmas bonuses.
Right. I don't know if many people know here, but literally the prior thing, and there was a lot of heat even after this being reduced, there's a mandatory Christmas bonus for all employees. If you don't give your employee a Christmas bonus, I think it's based on the number of years they worked for you, you will go to jail.
Yeah, it's the Christmas bonus is it's 10% up to $600. It used to be, now it's $200.
Yeah. So it's not a big thing, but it's like, oh my God, I forgot, I'm going to jail.
But you know, they reduced it again from 600 to 200. So it's gotten more flexible than where it was. I don't think we'll see another jump, you know, in the near future to make it more flexible, but.
It's just interesting from a Silicon Valley tech perspective. If you could get your employees to stay with you for 6 to 10 years at the cost of paying some bonuses and things, that would be something you'd fly across the world for. So
that's true. There is a flip side of this. If you're trying to hire engineers and they're used to like lifetime employment, it's a great thing. So.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ryan Lackey. I discovered Puerto Rico as a place to consider moving last year when I was planning to move from Seattle to Las Vegas, and somebody on Facebook said, "Why not Puerto Rico?" I initially was dubious, and then I Googled a little bit, and I discovered it. Came to the conference last year, discovered it, and moved last year. So very excited about that. I've been involved in cryptocurrency and the predecessors of cryptocurrency since the 90s, the Cypherpunks mailing list, Anonymous Digital Cash, Chaumian tokens, everything else. And I actually left the US to live in Anguilla, a little Caribbean island east of here, to get around ITAR back in the 90s. So I'm familiar with moving to places for things like that. My dream for Puerto Rico is that it's an integrated place where you can do the right legal structure and have your engineers on site. Right now I work with the Tezos project where we have our developers in Paris, we have another development group in New York City, and we have a legal entity that is a foundation that holds a bunch of assets in Zug. And traveling between these places, communications, complexity, everything else is really inefficient. If there was a place, a jurisdiction where you could have great engineers, capital from people that have moved here from previous exits, as well as a favorable legal system, all in one place, so you could just walk down the hall to change something, that would be the chance for Puerto Rico to be really a world leader.
So I'll sort of do a follow-on on jurisdictions because we're certainly going to be asking some of these questions of the leaders of the Bahamas and Bermuda, which, along with the other B and C countries, BVI and Cayman and Curacao and Barbados, you know, have you know, been really fighting each other in a positive way to say, "Ooh, I'll be more friendly than you. I'll be more friendly than you." And friendliness to you know, our industry is essentially, you know, are you going to not make a lot of complex rules about starting a business? Are you not going to penalize us because we do something with the blockchain? Are you not going to ban us from things because the blockchain may be publicly traded? And are you clear, or as clear as can be, on, you know, how you treat the difference between securities and commodities, and how do you regulate each one of them, and how do you tax them? What is everybody's sort of like understanding of where Puerto Rico is right now, and how far do you think we can sort of like get this to be an ideal jurisdiction, including banking, in the next, let's say, 5 years? I'll start with Giovanni.
I think the more awareness we create in a positive sense, that helps the just, you know, your general person as well as the government to integrate and incorporate blockchain. There are factions of the government that definitely want to support this. I mean, you saw Pedro this morning speak. Just the fact that they have the blockchain panel, you know, shows where the government wants to go with this. You also need, you know, your private sector community, and I mean locals, not just the Act 2022s. You need locals. You need college professors to be teaching more blockchain and integrate into that. You know, or even, you know, some of you guys, you know, volunteer and go in and speak, you know, within the university. You know, that'll help integrate a lot more, including from the legislative side. When we see those facets of government react, and enough people react, then we'll have legislators that they don't even understand half the things they vote on sometimes. So, you know, we just need to get enough initiative from some of them that do understand, the younger crowd that do understand this. I think the will is there, so it can happen. It needs to happen quicker, or I guess I always want things to happen quicker, but that's kind of private sector thinking versus government thinking. But yeah, definitely a goodwill, and then if you have enough good and real projects that are doing things that seem that are here for the permanent, or for the long run at least. If you have more of that, then it's symbiotic. You'll get the support, and it will flexibilize. And then, again, regarding banking, well, that's just a complex industry on its own. So it'll be partially dependent on what we see happen, in the U.S. After all, we're always looking at, what the gringo's doing. But we do have here, like earlier today, we had a Bo that has his international financial entity, so that's the first step towards banking, and some other similar projects. Same thing for hedge funds that have established here in Puerto Rico. If those funds are successful and are regulated and kind of are just doing their things right, what they're doing right correctly, that shines a bright, positive image to get things done quicker.
And I will say, in terms of progress, this is 2-year anniversary of the first CoinAgenda Caribbean here, and we now have the verge of launching the San Juan Mercantile Exchange, right? So, I mean, that's something that I think 2 years ago was just a pipe dream of maybe somebody would be able to go and launch a cryptocurrency exchange here. It was at least written in the law, and literally I had someone the first year from Pridco go and talk about what some of the Act 20 and Act 22s were, and literally the morning of the first CoinAgenda, I got a call from a junior person at OSIF, and they said, "We want to understand," because I had an article in El Nuevo Dia, how you can legally talk about Bitcoin in public. And I said, "Because you can legally talk about Bitcoin in public?" And they said, "Yes, but you're not allowed to sell unregistered securities." I said, "No one's selling anything, they're just talking about it." Yeah. I said, "Do you want to come down and, but it says investor conference." So yes, you can talk to investors. You have gold conferences. Can you come, you want to come down and see it? And it's like, "Oh, we're on the weekend, we don't work on the weekends, but please come to our office next week." And the gentleman from Pridco actually came in with me and explained that it's perfectly, I said, there's this thing called Parallel 18 that's actually the government's involved in. They actually bring investors down to talk to startups. She goes, "Really? We should probably investigate them." So that was what the flavor was last year, and I think, or 2 years ago. And I think every other thing I was saying, we have some things coming up now. None of this is financial advice, and nothing is an offer for sale, which of course is this conference as well. Now we had somebody actually from the governor's office speaking and saying, literally that, an ICO on the island is something that's possible, and that when the Valores is fully determined, you're going to, as Bo had mentioned, have tokenized real estate, tokenized art. All these things are going to be tax-free to people who are under Act 22 and 4% tax under Act 20 if it's an asset.
So, I think you also have to look at the nature of the beast. A regulator will be a regulator. So OSIF is screaming, "Oh, that's my jurisdiction," so they'll go and see if they have to regulate. But in some case, I'm working with a fund, for example, that's not necessarily registered under OSIF, is federally registered. I'll say the name if the person allows me to. But we sat down with the commissioner anyway, and kind of told him, we did this, we did that, we did that. We weren't filing anything with the commissioner. We were just letting him know, and right. I think they appreciate that, and so.
No, I call them the good cops and bad cops of government, and it's not just Puerto Rico by any means. The economic development people want to bring people down, and the regulators are like, "Not so fast. Well, what are the many ways you can do bad things, and let's make sure you are prohibited from doing any of them before you even think about doing them." I know that when the Isle of Man actually had a big conference, and they said, "We're going to move everyone to the Isle of Man. It's going to be the crypto island and all this." Like the day that they had their big, conference, the central bank, I think it was, or one of the regulators there said, we don't want these people on the island. Kind of kill the whole thing off. And Isle of Man is not really doing that much right now. It's Gibraltar.
But to add to that also, it's still, Puerto Rico is part of the United States. And so we're going to adapt also to the regulations that the states have. So in the federal aspect of it, even though that we are a Commonwealth and we have our own, could I say, liberties to make some laws differently than on the federal jurisdiction, we also have to follow what is going on also on the federal ambient. So that could answer.
Well, no, and I think that's where the opportunity is, because there's a lot of gray area about what territorially can be done that has the impact of law, because we declare it over mainland law, and what we can't. So, and I think that's still kind of a gray area that the governor of Puerto Rico, essentially, and the legislature has to go and say, hey, we want to do this, and then the mainland will say, no, you can't, or sure, fine. I mean, that's how 20 and 22 happened.
Yeah, but we have done both. We have created laws internally based on our position as a nation, right? But we have used our position as a Commonwealth and reverse that and use the federal laws, use those gray areas to create incentive laws.
Right.
So it's a tricky thing, but you're right. It could be an area of opportunity I think if we also know the stakeholders, being that there are regulators and there are people that don't want to be regulated. So I think you got to find a middle ground to actually have some processes and to create an ecosystem that it has to be created here.
So Scott, you've been here about a year and a half? Yeah. So how have you noticed sort of the evolution of the ecosystem evolving?
Great question. When we first moved here, the market was a little bit different than it is today. You know, our fund, you know, we invested many millions of dollars in 2018. Reminds me of kind of a joke that we unfortunately play on ourselves. Who here knows how to become a crypto millionaire? You start with about 50 million. So 2018 has been a remarkable year. And obviously we've, you know, we've seen the industry through, you know, boom times and bust times. We're definitely, you know, in the midst of a crypto winter. I think that we're still, the industry in general is still looking for its Netscape moment. We always kind of thought Ethereum was it, but it turned out that Ethereum was kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. It allowed the ICOs to kind of run on top of it, creating this, you know, what turned out to be a really massive bubble at the time. And so, but it didn't really generate that consumer awareness. It didn't really generate the usage of blockchain-related projects. So when you look at the applications that have been built, you look at the things that we currently have, they're just not really quite ready for prime time. So where I think we go from here is, as you notice from the conferences, they're more conservative. You don't see, you know, 50 projects trying to raise, you know, $10 million to $50 million. You don't see rooms with 1,000 investors, you know, looking to throw money at things. So we're back into what I would call a more normal type of investment time. And we'll see that, you know, over the next 6 to 18 months, I think we're probably not going to see the securities tokens and the security exchanges really take off yet. So until there's liquidity in the security exchange and the security token market, we won't see a big boom coming from there. I expect that we will see that maybe more like 18 to 36 months from now. But in the meantime, we're all kind of sitting, hoping. Obviously, blockchains themselves need to work a little bit better. I know Tezos has some great ideas and plans. A number of different blockchains are fighting to kind of create that base layer where applications can be built on top of them, can actually work, can work at scale. So when that occurs and we start to see, let's just call it the first really breakout consumer runaway hit on blockchain, that's when I think you'll start to see momentum come back into the market. This will likely happen sometime in the next year or two as the security token market begins to, really kind of come onto its own.
And utility tokens as well. I mean, the first use case of the ERC-20 was funding. It didn't mean you were going to build your token that was going to be your mainnet 5 days after the funding. And I don't think anybody promised that, but people invested as if that was the case. When in some cases they're more like, I don't know if they're biotech timeframes, but they're certainly enterprise software timeframes. And you had an overreaction to that shot many, even some of the more promising projects down 90% or more. Far more than the drop in Bitcoin or even Ethereum. And, there was a couple of, stories that came out, one of which was totally fake news. It was, the story that said that 85% of all ICOs were scams. They basically, it was their first report that they ever had issued. It was a person who used to work for Argonne, started a new research thing, and made a lot of headlines by saying 85% were all scams. The methodology they used, were they still tweeting? If they weren't tweeting, they were a scam. And a lot of these were actually teams that just simply didn't have anything to tweet about, and they were building the product. I mean, there was a couple of our clients that were in there, and they were very surprised to find out they were a scam and dead. And they still had employees. They were still building their programs, and it was your ultimate fake news. So that was one thing. The other one, and I don't know the validity of this number, but it came out and it said I think that there was 57,000 active users of all decentralized applications. And, and I think most of them were like, 3 or 4 apps, gambling apps on EOS and a couple of apps on Ether, and everything else had 0 users. Well, many things that haven't been built yet are going to have 0 users. And to me, that harkens back to, again, the 1990s and people, pooping on the internet when they were laughing at the concept of e-commerce, and they're saying, Amazon's a joke, and, this whole vision that there's going to be, billions of dollars spent in e-commerce. World e-commerce, they had done some study, had I don't know, $10 million or something at that point. There was hot, selling hot sauce and a few things like that. Now it's in the trillions. It just takes a few years. So obviously that's what we're hopeful of with applications. We really haven't had our Angry Birds moment. We haven't had our Netscape moment. We haven't had our Pokemon Go moment. We haven't had our app that somebody says, you're not cool unless you've tried this. Right. And, it'll probably be a game. Might be gambling. We'll see. But we haven't even had something with the visibility of a Pokemon Go that requires a blockchain. And we need distribution. And I think for distribution, we're going to talk about this a little bit later in the conference, you need a telephone company, a mobile provider to go and partner with or buy an exchange, because they already have all your KYC. They already have the distribution. They could just simply say, okay, Verizon just bought Kraken. Any one of our 120 million users, if you go and sign up for a Kraken account, we're going to give you $500 of free, dApps. And the dApps already have those in their treasury for marketing purposes and airdrops. And that's when you're going to see, this really kickstart again. Questions? Oh, you were going to say something? Oh. So we'll take a few questions, then we're going to go to Giovanni's presentation. Any questions in the audience? I guess we're good. Thank you, panel.
Thanks, guys.
Let me.
Yeah, you have a statement?
I got to share with you guys this. I was actually this week and this weekend and next week there are many events happening in Puerto Rico, so that's good for you to know. And one of the slides that I saw this past Thursday is one that shows, I would love to show, but I'm going to tell you guys, shows the primary tax incentive laws that we have and how much people or how many decrees have they put in 2016 and 2018. And every one of them have increased exponentially. For example, Act 20, 2016, 249 decrees, 2018, 610. Act 22, 341 decrees, 2018, 700 decrees, right? Act 14, 435 decrees in 2016, 2,096 in 2018. So it shows that it's moving. So people are coming to Puerto Rico, are acting on it, and things are happening. So just have faith on the island and try to come and put your work here. So I want to leave you guys with those statistics so you have a glimpse of what is happening here also.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're going to go right into Giovanni's presentation, and then we'll have one more panel before we get the governor of Bahamas on the screen. Giovanni.
Yes. So in the first CoinAgenda a couple of years ago, CoinAgenda Caribbean, this was the part where a lot of people left the room. They, like, yeah, taxes, you know. Yeah. So let's does this work? Oh. So we're going to talk an overview of Act 20, Act 22, Act 273, and taxes and blockchain. A lot of you know this information already, so I'll go through the presentation. If there's any questions you'd like to ask, and we have time, we'll go through them. So Act 22, as most of you know, offers 100% exemption on Puerto Rico-sourced capital gains. Same thing for interest and dividends. The important part there is that they need to be Puerto Rico sourced. In the case of capital gains, it may be simpler if we're talking about equities or blockchain because they follow the residence of the taxpayer. In the case of interest and dividends, it's a little more complex because normally interests are sourced to the location where the payer is, and same thing for dividends. Although in the case of interest, there's planning that we can do around something called the portfolio interest exemption that is normally available for foreign lenders that are providing funds to US companies. That applies to Puerto Rico because we are a foreign tax jurisdiction. So a lot of planning could be done around that. In a similar way, in the case of dividends, swap agreements are available, and the rule for swaps is that they're also sourced to the residence of the taxpayer. So as long as we find a counterpart that's willing to do a swap agreement with you for interest income and their fee makes sense, it's something that we could take advantage to through Act 22. This won't be subject to alternate minimum tax or alternate basic tax here in Puerto Rico. And then some requirements, ABC apply. You need to obtain a grant. I remember originally, this was back in 2013, 14, you met some people that just thought they moved here and automatically got these incentives. They need to apply. You need to become a resident, which means you need to comply with the residency rules imposed by the IRS, as well as Puerto Rico's own set of rules. Those are the presence test, tax home test, and closer connections test. The president's test is what people mention over and over and over. It's 183 days, 183 days. That's, yes, one of the most common ways to meet with the president's test. Very well, it could be more. Stay here for 300 days or more, or like, you know, locals that just leave for a couple weeks on vacations or maybe work. But there are other methods that are in the rules, including not being present in the US for more than 90 days. And then there's no set minimum amount of days that you need to be here in Puerto Rico. But I always recommend more days in Puerto Rico than in the US, just to comply with, if somebody's doing that version. But you definitely need to make sure you do that, and at the same time, comply with the tax home and closer connections test, which could be tricky, but we can discuss in detail. And then the last is contribute. This was a newer requirement that was imposed to Act 22 recipients. There's a $5,000 charitable donation to a charity that is certified here in Puerto Rico. A lot of people that I know under the program are giving more anyway, so it's good to have that minimum, and I know it's helped fund many projects. But Pedro, I'm talking about cutting the check, so you like this part, pay attention. No, but we joke about that, but Pedro has a lot of initiatives and you know, revolve a lot around that, giving a lot more than maybe just that minimum $5,000, so cut the check.
Anybody want to cut the check?
So now we're moving to Act 20, which is the Export Services Act. So it's a real big one because this one is about bringing your businesses here. Benefits are 4% tax on net income, and then you get 60% exemption on municipal tax, which is a nominal tax anyway. It could be higher for certain businesses and in certain municipalities. No tax from dividends issued by the Act 20 company, regardless of Act 22. This is very important for several reasons. Some people don't have income other than their businesses, so might not see the immediate need for an Act 22 decree. But the other one is that this one applies to locals. I have an Act 20 company. I provide services to clients outside of Puerto Rico, and I get tax-free distributions from my company, which pays a 4% tax. So it's very important that, you know, these benefits are included. And then there's a 90% exemption on property tax. Again, could be higher depending on the municipality you locate to. Some requirements and considerations. You need to operate from Puerto Rico. This can't be a shell. Can't be, you know, a mailbox company or whatnot. You need to have substantial operations from here. That means the owner or founder being here, or if you're not very involved in the company or passive, you could hire someone to do the work, but you definitely need people here. I don't want to say around the clock, but enough to source the income here in Puerto Rico. You need to comply with every other local filing requirement. And maybe we can talk about people that already have grants. A few years ago, there was some audits that were done by the Puerto Rico government, and you know, we had some pushback until what they were requesting, but the important thing was that there are requirements set forth in the grant, and if you don't comply with those, even though you have a 20-year contract, if you fail on that contract, right, then the government could take that grant away from you. It's not happening so far, but we need to be ready, and we need to be, you know, make sure we're in compliance. There needs to be an evaluation of the ownership structure. There are considerations around CFC rules that people see as a negative thing. Some could be positive. I remember when there was a little bit of the ICO craze, people would just say, no, but we're launching in Cayman, or we're launching in Malta, or even recently, actually that the Malta blockchain island title, I think has an asterisk on it, because a lot of the planning had to do with Malta issuing you a rebate on the taxes you paid to them. And then some people, I guess, were gullible enough to believe that the IRS wasn't going to deem that rebate as taxable income. So it really does nothing for you. You're getting that rebate. And the IRS didn't express itself directly about the blockchain issue, but they did talk about the rebate, and they, of course, confirmed that was taxable. So we need to evaluate that, and Puerto Rico has some special provisions for CFC rules where you can cease being a CFC as long as you have at least 50% of the ownership held by Puerto Rico residents. And then we have the issue with related party transactions. This is another thing that could be important when you're launching a token or a blockchain company, if for some reason you don't want to launch the token from Puerto Rico, you could still launch from a jurisdiction such as Cayman, but provide the services from here. So basically the token launch happens in the foreign jurisdiction, but the money comes here through a billing, basically. So we need to be aware of transfer pricing. Yeah. The Act 273, which is international financial entities, offers similar tax incentives around the 4%, some additional incentives from municipal taxes. It also does have a special provision for the purchase of properties that are held by financial institutions in Puerto Rico. So that's the only local business you can do through an IFE is, for example, purchase a portfolio of loans from a local bank that you could either collect on or execute the property on. So it's an interesting incentive that combines with that. There's a minimum 4-employee requirement, one of which needs to be a risk manager. You also need to get a decree from PRITCO, and you need to work with the Commissioner of Financial Institutions. Like we mentioned earlier, they're a regulator. Their nature is to regulate and impose these, so they'll have some strict things you need to comply with, but if you do, this could be a resourceful tool. We have other incentives laws. 399, which is the International Insurance Center, is gaining more and more traction. You could do self-insurance and captive insurance companies through these, as well as reinsurance. Act 185, which is private equity funds. I think originally when that one launched, there was a requirement that you had to diversify into at least 5 different types of class or portfolios of investments. And that kind of killed it, because if you're a real estate person, maybe you're not a tech person, so you really couldn't do that. They changed that. They eliminated that requirement, and now there's no longer that restriction. And I think that wasn't announced enough, so the message hasn't gotten out there.
There's no concentration now?
Yeah, they eliminated that.
When did that happen?
About 18 months ago.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So that's the thing that a lot of people didn't know about that. And that one's very good because it helps you raise local capital. The investors get a 50% deduction on their investment once you deploy the funds from your fund, which is massive. You know, somebody invests $1 million in your fund, they get a $500,000 deduction on their taxes. So for a local that doesn't have tax incentives or other tax incentives, this is a real great tool to raise funds from them. We have public-private partnerships, which is for more large-scale things. Renewable energy incentives. These vary depending on the kilowatts or megawatts you generate, but they include tax credits. Manufacturing Incentives Act, which also includes research and development, and you can generate tax credits for the R&D. The EB-5 investor visa, which is important to say that Puerto Rico, the entire island is a EB-5 region, and to date we're subject to the lower amount of investment required, so it's a good incentive. And the Film Industry Incentives Act, which also offers up to 50% tax credits. Blockchain and cryptocurrency matters. A lot of this is from 2014 notice. So it's treated as property for tax purposes, and that's what allows us to treat the capital gains as Puerto Rico sourced. Mine, cryptocurrency, and currency from Forex is generally ordinary income. And if you receive compensation for paid in cryptocurrency, you're going to pay taxes on the fair market value of the tokens at that time. I get asked if my Act 20 company, or if my company gets paid in crypto, my recommendation is normally sell it right away or transfer it to yourself as a dividend, because in your hands as an Act 22 recipient, the cap gain will be tax-free, but in the company, generally not unless you make the proper tax election. So something to consider. Staking coins will also generate ordinary income, and token sales or ICOs generate income at the moment of launch. That might not be the case for STOs if you are in fact giving away equity, but if you're not giving away equity, then you're going to have a taxable event upon that sale. Some conclusions is, basically what you already know or have figured out this far. It's a great opportunity to move here under Act 20 and Act 22, take advantage of these incentives. The other indirect advantage is, the people moving here, enough to fill rooms and rooms of ideas and just wealth of knowledge that's being transferred to the islands, specifically in this space. Yeah, so these are just some notes. This reads virtual currency and uncertainty continuing. This is because the commissioner of the IRS in late 2018 in an AICPA meeting basically said not to expect any guidance on or any additional guidance on the treatment of cryptocurrency anytime soon. That's both good and bad. It's bad because uncertainty continues. I saw it as a positive thing because the AICPA had issued some requests for guidance, which CPAs were treating as guidance itself on how to treat cryptocurrency. And the commissioner of the IRS kind of said, hold your horses. Our position hasn't changed. So again, good and bad. This was in November last year. This is just a reminder on the AICPA that had issued a request for guidance in 2016 to the IRS. They reissued that request for guidance in 2018. This is the one I'm referencing where they issue a request for guidance, but also issue their own guidance. This is where a lot of CPAs are getting that you need to file FBARs or FATCA for cryptocurrency held in foreign exchanges. So this is an AICPA position, not an IRS position. And the American Bar of Attorneys, the American Bar Association, they took a stance that I side more with, which was requesting the IRS to establish some safe harbors and waivers up to the time they issued the letter in 2018, basically for Forex and other cryptocurrency transactions. The ABA is basically telling the IRS, there's confusion, it's your fault. You need to issue a safe harbor to investors to make sure they don't run into tax trouble for lack of this guidance. So just, some developments from collegiate organizations that, represents our profession, what they're saying, what they think. That was it. Any questions? You have a question? Of course.
Questions? Put your hand up. Oh, there we go.
In your opinion, since I know you've worked with a lot of different types of companies and structures, which structures do you see, whether it's dealing with cryptocurrency or maybe not, I guess benefiting the most? Being able to help people set up their tax structures for their companies or individually with the types of businesses they run, and then being their advisor for years. What have you seen? Who's benefited the most? Has it been based on their personal decisions or on the types of companies and industries they're in? I guess where have you seen the most impact from these incentives?
I guess it's a complicated question, but if you just follow the statistics, originally what we had was a lot of the financial industry moving here. It's 2013, 2014. It was all hedge fund guys, traders, New York guys. That kind of dried up. And it started moving into the technology space, but that's very broad. What technology space? So it's CRM managers, is it software as a service, and then eventually blockchain. The thing with blockchain is kind of combines, that technology aspect with the hedge fund aspect. Running and operating a fund from here could definitely offer some great incentives for the fund managers as well as, potentially for their investors if set up correctly. But there's other firms. I'd like to see more accounting firms and more law firms moving down here, and we have quite a few that represent clients, especially in the mass tort space. But I think there's a lot of untapped potential there, and now I'm seeing a lot of telemedicine and laboratories moving down here. I think that's going to be looks like it's going to be the new wave. So it really depends, but if you definitely provide an export service, if you need talented, smart people, and And honestly, the wages here are lower too. So if you're like in the legal or medical sectors, you can find the talent here, pay them a living wage or even a more than living wage as compared to in the States. That's very competitive and still save some money. So maybe answer your question.
How long do you see the current grants lasting? I'm not asking like if you get one, how long does it last for, but how long do you see those current ones being available to new applicants?
Yeah.
And what do you see changing in the future?
So the law has a sunset clause, Act 20, that says that after December 31st, 2020, there will be no more new applications accepted. But that being said, if we just look at this historically, you know, Puerto Rico has operated under tax incentives for decades. We used to have the old version of Act 135, which was a 1990s decree, the Industrial Incentives Act. That expired in 2007. I was with Johnson & Johnson back then when they were part of the group renegotiating what became Act 73. So, you know, that expired. It was extended for some time. You got Act 73 in 2008. And then in 2012, you got a spin-off of Act 73, which is Act 20. So the act may very well expire in 2020, but I'm sure a new version might come in. You know, what will likely happen is that Act 20 has been amended about 5 times in just over 6 years. Some of that has had to do with compliance. I see that, you know, now they're targeting SaaS and whatnot, so now maybe it's gonna be called the SaaS Act or something like that, right? Targeting a specific sector, and you'll likely see more requirements, because I know there's gonna be a lot of people that, you know, that are gonna be demanding for that, just more requirements and accountability. I think, you know, mostly what I always suggest to do is, you know, first obviously hire locally, and then another important factor, and somebody that could be your important allies, the banks. When we had this scare in October about what happened, some of my first calls were to the people at First Bank and Banco Popular, and these guys just immediately sent the message to the president of each bank, which in turn, you know, a lot of other people called them, but I do know for a fact that, you know, President of Popular and First Bank called the legislature. You need those people on your side, so, you know, maintaining deposits in these banks is, you know, a way to and I know their tech is not like what you're used to in B of A or whatever, but, you know, click some extra buttons or maybe you make a call, you know, but spread the wealth around the local banks as well because they're great, powerful allies.
Technically, you're required to have your primary deposits here.
Yeah, but it's not. That's where I'm going to. You are required under the IRS regulations because it does ask where you're banking, but you know the issue does exist because you know we get the feedback from the banks too. You're sending me these clients and they're not necessarily keeping up with their deposits. So.
What type of marketing are companies like yours and the government of Puerto Rico doing to help encourage Act 20 and Act 22 from Puerto Ricans like myself who were born and raised in the United States?
Well, the government has several things. They're launching Invest PR, which is a marketing arm of the Act 2022 programs and whatnot. They also have the Qualified Promoter Program, which incentivizes people that bring companies here. They basically get a chunk of the taxes paid by the company you bring in here. Personally, out of my own expense, I don't get reimbursed by the government, but I do travel to these conferences as well and, you know, kind of put the word out. And then locally, you know, you'll see me in a big conference like this one, or you'll see me in a, you know, if I have the time, in some other get-together, whether it's something that EduBlock puts together or another organization, you know, helping, or Crypto Mondays, you know, just speaking out, you know, those type of events are open invite, free to access. The local community also, you know, as anything else, has a responsibility to see what's going on and not just think it's negative immediately. You know, you need to learn about what's happening and how can I take advantage or be part of this. And I think, you know, message is getting out there.
Yeah, Giovanni speaks in New York. He spoke at the CoinAgenda actually sponsored it global in Vegas, and so he's definitely been trying to get the diaspora back as well as new folks.
All right.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, let's bring up the next panelist. Quite a few of you. You know who you are. It's the Puerto Rico Community Panel. And James, I have you moderating this one. Yeah. So really, we're just, as we discussed this is just really to talk a little bit about, from the community perspective, how is blockchain affecting Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico affecting blockchain? And you all come from different perspectives. We've got a mix of folks from the island, folks here less than a year, folks here several years. And James, we met a little over a year ago when you came down. You can talk a little about your story and get everybody else's. And you got until 4 o'clock when we get the next set of politicians on.
4 o'clock. Okay, thank you, Michael. So, brief intro of me. I'm James Greaves. I'm the CEO of Glyph. You hear from my accent. I grew up here in Puerto Rico. And I grew up in England. And how does an English person end up being here? Well, they end up becoming a permanent resident of the United States. And as an English person, I can live anywhere. Well, not anywhere. There's about 50 places I can live tax-free. But as a U.S. national, I can only live one. It's Puerto Rico. But I didn't come here for the tax. We came here, been here just over a year now, and brought my company down here for Consensus. It was our first live event that we ever did last year. Was up on stage, which was a great experience last year. And yeah, I'm just very, very happy. I've got 5 kids. We all live here in Puerto Rico and a wife. So 7 of us here in Puerto Rico, and we love it. So that's a bit about me. But can we, just as a start, maybe just kind of go down the line, just a bit about yourselves, name, what you do, what brought you to Puerto Rico if you're already here, kind of what you're up to?
Sure, I can kick it off. So my name is Anthony Delgado. I've been a software developer, serial entrepreneur, and online marketer for the last 10 plus years. And yo soy New Yorican, so my family's originally from Arecibo, but I was born and raised in New York. But I used to come to the island every year as a child. My grandfather passed away when I was in high school, and I always had a desire and a yearning to come back to the island. Like when I hear the Coquilles at night, it feels like home, right? And then after Hurricane Maria, I was inspired to chase something that was bigger than myself. So initially, me and some friends, we sent over a pallet of water and some supplies, some food, and we dropped it off at a drop-off location. And we saw that the supplies weren't getting where they needed to go. And so about 2 months later, me and a few friends and strangers, we took it upon ourselves to take one-way tickets here to the island. And while we were here, we gave away 300 solar panel lights, food, water, supplies. We didn't team up with any like big nonprofits or big companies. It was just a bunch of New Yorkers and a bunch of really crazy people, all different nationalities, that got together and wanted to like do something for the better good. And I took it upon myself at that time to, it was supposed to be a 1-week trip, turned into like a 3-week trip. And then I went back to New York, quit my job. I was working at a technology accelerator. We were making small seed investments into companies in Newark, New Jersey. And took it upon myself to, leave my role there, come down here and start Disrupt. So that's my organization. It's called Disrupt Puerto Rico. It's a nonprofit, and we're on a mission to use technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship to help create financial freedom for the people that are here. I've been able to support myself, create financial freedom for myself using the power of the online economy, right? Like even when I came down here, my first question was like, is there Wi-Fi, right? Because if there's Wi-Fi, I can make a living, right? And I think a lot of the people in this room can relate to that. So, our mission is to spread the message that Wi-Fi and a dream is all that you really need to succeed. And we do that in a number of ways. So we host events and workshops. We just finished up an event yesterday. Thank you, Michael, for attending. and speaking. It was an amazing conversation. And yeah, we do events at universities, at high schools and local schools all around the island. And then we also do events here in San Juan. Shout out to Piloto 151 for hosting us yesterday. And yeah, that's me, and that's what I do.
Hello, my name is Ahmet Ugur, originally from New Jersey, just moved to Ireland a year ago. Me and my partner Carl, we are in the healthcare space, and we realized what blockchain could do for the healthcare, and we got excited. And around 2017, we thought that we have some tax problems because we invested in crypto, and we learned about Puerto Rico. I moved down here a year ago, and we fall in love with blockchain and what it could mean for all the industries, including healthcare. And we decided to help startups and also wanted to create a hub in Puerto Rico for the newcomers. Because my experience was like when I first come, okay, I didn't know where to go, whom to meet. It was a little challenging, so we want to remove that challenge. We want to make it easy for the newcomers. I believe in 2019 we're going to see big crowd coming in, hopefully with the crypto market going up. So we want to help them, and also we want to help the startups. So we opened a place called Satoshi Cafe in Old San Juan. It's basically just open. And we have a beautiful coffee shop downstairs, and we are building a 4,000 square feet space upstairs for blockchain. Everybody's welcome. The coffees are on me. We just got the crew trained. So, happy to be here.
Hey guys, Ben Lei here. Ben Lei, the last name is Lei, not Lee, so no relation to Bruce Lee. That's a joke. You're supposed to laugh. I was born in Vietnam, and I moved to Puerto Rico last March. Michael actually was the person who introduced me to Puerto Rico. At World Crypto Economic Forum in San Francisco, January, so very grateful towards that. By my trade, I was, for more than 10 years, I was in corporate, in private equity, real estate, investments, and consulting. So before I became an angel investor, I was a real estate investor. And then before I became a crypto investor, I was an angel investor. And I looked at the world of investments in a very concrete ways. And Puerto Rico has many ways that appeal to me because, as you can see, you look around, palm trees and beautiful beaches and tropical weather, it's just like Vietnam. So when I came to Puerto Rico, it felt like home to me. Obviously, most of us here came for the tax purposes in crypto trading and whatnot, but when you came down here to Puerto Rico, you realize it's a wonderful balance between work and life. And you really have a way to connect to the world in a much bigger way. So my goal of coming down to Puerto Rico is to become a world-class entrepreneur and investor. And really, this is a wonderful place to really raise a business. So by way of introduction, I'm an early-stage equity investor for many fintech companies, as well as agriculture tech, as well as media companies around the world. I'm also CEO, co-founder of CEO founder of Mira Mira, and CTO co-founder of Boss Yacht Club, which I'll be happy to talk to you about further. Really happy to be down here, and thank you for coming and support Puerto Rico.
Hi everybody. My name is Rob Brill. I'm in private equity. My real reason I think was invited to be here is, and it's interesting, your comment, is I was one of the first 10 to actually move and get a grant here. Came in late 12, actually started in 13. And so I'm the founder of the 2022 Act Society. And basically, I don't know if I'm preaching to the choir because I think like most people are actually here on the island. But obviously some people certainly hadn't heard of that. We became the epicenter organization very early on for how do you plug in, who do you need to know, who should be your service provider, who's the good guys, who's the bad guys, who's charging too much. We built it around a foundation. Everything all the, quote unquote dues go to a consortium, about 14 charities. We raised about 1.2 million last year, similar amount in the prior year, all given away. And then last but not least, a lobbying element to kind of protect our interests. Giovanni, who we work with, has talked about changes. There's been at least 5 changes to Act 20. There's been more. When he talked about October 31st, when I actually was flying here from Vancouver, my phone blew up because, hey, they just killed Act 2022. What are we going to do about it? So there was literally about a handful of people who I think even had the capability of calling on certain people to say, hey, we need to make sure that this gets reversed. And it was about a handful, and it got done in about 48 hours, which I think in most cases would be impressive. So anybody who doesn't know or is questioning how to plug in and whatnot, I'll be available for like the next hour. Jorge is our in-house tax CPA. We're not service providers. We're here to plug in the community directly with others and you know, be a service to them. So that's it.
Hey everyone, so my name is Michael Angelo. I was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So essentially, I guess everything started after Hurricane Maria. So I went outside and everything was destroyed. It was very sad, but at the same time, I didn't see disparity. I wasn't like just trapped in dogma. I saw opportunity for some reason. Like it just came to me at the moment. So after that, a couple months after that, Blockchain Unbound happened. And I went to that event because I remember that I saw this event. I did trading. I also started doing some mining. And I was really interested in the industry and how we can implement this technology to take us further into Web 3.0, which is something I believe in. So I remember seeing this event, and it was like $5,000 or something to go into this event, and you're seeing a young college student with like literally no money, right? And I was like, that's really messed up. They want to come here, they want to help, but it's like $5,000. I can't pay that. That's like gas money, that's rent, that's tuition. So I grab my computer, I start searching on this like website that gives me like people's names through LinkedIn. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get this person. And so I found this lady that was actually organizing Blockchain Unbound, right? And I'm like, okay, I got her email. So I'm like, dear lady, I wanna pay $5,000, but I really wanna learn. Can you please give me a ticket? So she does. She eventually gives me the ticket, and I'm like, hell yeah, I got the ticket. I get to like go to this event. So I go to this event. My mind was just like, so I grew up in this place called Monte Carlo. It's a very small neighborhood in the middle of San Juan, in the intersection of San Juan and Carolina. So I didn't see much, you know. I wasn't really an entrepreneur per se growing up. So this event really inspired me to do more. I saw startups that just tried to innovate and change the world in a very positive way. I remember seeing you for the first time. I was like, that's amazing. Home server, yes. Where can I sign? How my money, right? So after that, I started a nonprofit organization, co-founded, called EduBlock. They're still around, like AJ. So we did curriculums and workshops because I was really honed on teaching students the benefits of technology so they could grow. I was like, guys, you guys need to understand. You see these billionaires, these entrepreneurs, we can do the same thing. I know it sounds crazy, but we can definitely do it. So after that, I started an organization, a company actually, called Keyband. And so it all started because I saw that there's going to be an opportunity in the coming years where IoT is going to use several protocols that use key exchanges, so encrypted keys. And so it happens that blockchain uses the same thing to sign a transaction. You also have your 24-word backup phrases. So I was like, how can I fix this user experience so we're closer to mainstream adoption? So we created Keyband. It's basically a wristband that uses your ECG, your heartbeat. So we created our own algorithm that uses your heartbeat to authenticate a person. So constant authentication. So we created this band. It manages an endless amount of private keys, and essentially it is the future, right? It's cyber-physical systems. Open a door, sign a transaction, keyband to keyband, even offline. So we did that. I kind of disappeared for a year. I incubated this company in Guaynabo, and now I'm here.
I'm Brian Borgery. I've also been here about a year. I'd come to Puerto Rico before because I have a wayward uncle who's been on the island of Vieques for 33 years. But so I've always liked Puerto Rico. I came here originally last year just to scout things out. Came with a couple of my coworkers. We started a company in 2015 called Daply, making plug-and-play home servers, stackable storage, IoT modules to connect all of your home automation, really trying to make sure you own and control all your data and doing it in a way a general consumer can do it. That ties in, like he was mentioning, private key management, other things like that. Won't bore everyone with it right now, but that was really important to what I was looking at here in Puerto Rico. I had been presented with tax incentives, things like that. Great, I like paying less taxes, but I didn't jump on anything until I started to look a little closer and realize that in working in hardware, which is not super common in blockchain overall, and the technologies we were working with and mesh internet, things like that, that Puerto Rico was a really, really good microcosm and test bed for what we wanted to do. If we can hone in wireless and things like that to work well in cement and metal construction, it's going to work even better in sheetrock and wood in the States or other places in the world. And I also started to notice, not just blockchain, but a lot of people with the mindset of decentralization, of disrupting, of different things had been starting to congregate here. And I started to just find people who we could work with, collaborate with, to the point where I live in Guaynabo, just outside of San Juan. I limit how much I come into San Juan because I'm overloaded with opportunity or partnerships or different things to do every time I come in. There's just so much going on here to help grow what you're doing. And most recently, just on a passion project, I have a background in equity crowdfunding and things like that. I'm getting ready to launch tandem crowdfunding platforms called Fund Puerto Rico, both for donations, investment opportunity zones, things like that, just to help ease the flow of capital, because there are people who are looking for investments, projects. It's not always easy to deploy capital here or donate even sometimes. So just trying to do what I can in my skill set to help out with that and looking for like-minded people to do so as well.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, guys. Well, we're out of time. Just kidding. I think we've got a couple more minutes. Before I ask the next question, I just want to understand the audience a little bit more so we know the best way to go here. Just by raise of hands, who here is not from Puerto Rico or not planning on living in Puerto Rico? So we've got pretty much, there's a few visitors here, and welcome. So for the 5 of you who put your hands up, we'll fix that later. Based on that response, let me just ask for those who are here, your advice from this panel of how to get more involved in building community. Like, what are the opportunities to serve, to give back, to build community? Where would be the places that you would suggest people lean in?
Well, I'll go first. I mean, once again, so my day job is private equity. My hobby, which is not a hobby anymore, is the head of the 2022 Act Society. So we literally figured out like pretty much everything from the get-go. And the whole point was when I got here, there was no one who explained anything. And the information that we typically got from, we visited 5 attorneys, and every attorney told us not different information, but more information. And so we kept learning different things. And then as others dropped on the island, they said, oh, well, I didn't know about that. And so we literally, you know, plugged in where we knew how to guide people, refer them to service providers that make sense. That's one aspect. The biggest thing is plugging in. You talked about, oh, I didn't know how to connect with people. So admittedly, the society started with hedge funds, private equity guys like me, but it's morphed. So all you guys have been here for less than a year, and you know, obviously I had no idea, which automatically doesn't mean anything, but the fact that you guys weren't aware that you have a place and a resource where you could do that is a little surprising, but I guess it means we got more work on our side.
Thank you.
Yeah. Got it. Okay, well, let's talk.
Anybody else? Ben?
So I would just have to say, you guys all live here, and Puerto Rico is an island. We got to remember that first, right? So where I came from, San Francisco, is the Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley. New York, Newark is the concrete jungle. Puerto Rico is a real jungle, in all sense, right? So when you step onto this island, you got to understand all your rules that you have been an entrepreneur, an investor. You got to be able to mend your mind and change your mindset because you start from ground zero from the way up. It's very, very easy for you to think this is the US of A. It is the US of A politically. But to me, kind of is a big word because it is and it is not. You have to be able to embrace changes and learn again, learn new rules, and manage expectations for yourself and for others people. So I'm not here to be preachy, but I'm just speaking from my own experience, right? So like I say to you guys, I was a real estate investor before I became an angel investor, and then I came into blockchain investing. But my way of thinking has always been grounded in reality. When I look at entrepreneurs before I invest in them, I have to understand when push comes to shove, how do they make things work? Will they give up? And that's what you see in the grits of the Puerto Rican people. There's a lot of ways to make money here, not just blockchain and crypto. But people think about, like, say, for example, PayPal investors become successful, put money into other investors. Nobody say, oh, wow, are they crypto, are they AI investors? No, they're just investors, right? The same thing happens here. A bunch of a next wave of investors, entrepreneurs, no matter where they made their money, they came into this island, they will figure out a way to help this island and help themselves. So I'm incredibly grateful for the people that I ran into this island because they taught me to be really crowded in the way that a mom and pop restaurants, a small beer business, a boxer, how to make the next fight. In fact, we're actually making a movie about a boxer here in Puerto Rico. So Mira, I didn't tell you, but Mira is like a virgin, right? We have different verticals. We have media productions, we have charity, we have philanthropic endeavors, we have hospitality, and we have investments consulting around the world. And very few places in the world that you actually get to do that in a tax efficient and in a global gateway like in Puerto Rico. So that's it.
So yeah, to piggyback on what you were saying in the beginning, like Puerto Rico is an island, but that doesn't mean that you, your company, your business, you coming down here have to be a walled garden unto yourself or an island all unto yourself, right? I went to a party in Dorado a few weeks ago, and we pull up, and it's, and no offense to anyone that lives there, but you pull up, and it's literally 20 feet high wall of concrete and barbed wire. And I said, where are we going? Are we going to a prison? It's a maximum security. Where are we going? And then you go inside, and it's this beautiful luxury community, right? And I think we need to, like, if you look at what happened in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, right? They didn't put up a big wall around Williamsburg, Brooklyn and say no one else can come in here, right? So, I think that the people that are coming down here and are investing, they should be investing in communities and making them better, right? Investing in homes that need rehabilitation. There's no lack of those here in Puerto Rico, especially after the hurricane, right? And rebuilding the communities instead of building new communities kind of in and of themselves. And it's the same thing with doing business, right? Hire kids from the university. Go to the universities and integrate. Get out of San Juan. Get out of the bubble that we're all kind of in. I laugh. I was here for a few months, and it was right before the first Disrupt event, and I was really stressed out from the event. And my videographer, Supermanny, my co-founder, he's back there. He told me, he's like, bro, you're still in a bubble. Like, San Juan is like New York City. It's like Manhattan of Puerto Rico. So I was like, oh, I made this big jump and I moved to Puerto Rico. I was still in San Juan. I still have reliable data and internet, and I don't know what it's like on all the other parts of the island. And then we started exploring some more. But, the point is, hire from the local communities. Get involved, right? There's massive income inequality in the States as it is, but people are moving down here, and it's like 10x, right? You mentioned, like, dude, a conference ticket was $5,000. There's towns in Puerto Rico where the average annual income is $5,000, right? So I really think that the people that are moving down here with a global mindset need to have a little bit of empathy and realize there's cultural differences, there's language differences, there's a lot of financial differences, economic differences, all these different barriers, right? And to really come in and not be an island, come in and integrate. Learn Spanish, right? Come in, buy. You don't have to move to Dorado. You don't have to move to San Juan. You could buy a beautiful place in Fajardo or Luquillo and renovate it and actually be a contribution to the community and integrate into them, right? Another huge point, and then I'll pass the mic because we have a lot of panelists, is education, right? If you're coming down here and you're sending your kids to private school, then you are not invested in making the public schools better, right? And this is a problem that already exists in inner cities all around the United States, but it's amplified here. So getting involved in politics, getting involved in fixing the infrastructure, fixing Puerto Rico and helping to make Puerto Rico great again. You know, Puerto Rico is like a melting pot. I come from New York where like the Statue of Liberty is like that signal of the melting pot. Well, this was before the Statue of Liberty. Christopher Columbus landed here and like created the new world. So, you know, Puerto Rico is a mixture of Tainos, it's a mixture of people from Europe, Europeans, Africans, Indians. It's a mixture. It's always been a melting pot. So everyone that's coming here, you guys are welcome to come, but integrate, treat it like your own.
Great, thank you. Along those lines, right, you're all change makers. So what advice would you have, what change would you like to see in the community in Puerto Rico, and what change are you trying to make happen? Where can people lean in?
I would say the biggest key is education, right? You know, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, right? But the youth is the future, right? So fixing the education system is broken all around America. But if we can fix the education system here, bring technology and innovation, entrepreneurship into the universities, into the high schools, this can be the mecca for technology and innovation. All these software companies that are coming down here, we need to be growing the software developers. We need to be growing the leaders of the future, and that starts with education.
I like what he's saying. I think for us, one of the biggest things when we built the society was, I said, look, if I'm going to do this and this is free time, I want to make sure we make a contribution that matters. So we've actually changed legislation before. And one of the things that we've done, so look, we donated, let's say, $1 million and change last year. That's insignificant by itself. But we're trying to lead by example. And when Hurricane Maria came, we raised $1 million in a week. We got accused because people were flying back and forth on private planes, but we used those same private planes to get indigent care out and to get supplies in. And as far as schools, like literally the foundation has funded computer labs in public schools, not private schools, and that's happening. We're expanding upon that right now. So we're trying to be leaders of, initiating change for making Puerto Rico better because we want to be net contributors, not just net recipients.
Great, thank you. One last.
Yeah, just on that really quick. I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of people, whether it's from in government or business or charities, just locals working at the pizza shop or whatever. One of the interesting things I found, however, especially from maybe ex-government officials and things like that, is they want more people. Sometimes they'll come to me to go and talk to current people in the government because maybe they have political bad blood, but coming with kind of fresh perspective, fresh eyes, a fresh face, just talking and letting them know, like, hey, what about this? And even just asking questions or maybe pushing for certain things, coming from a different face, but someone who's genuine, who lives here, who's wanting to help things out, I've been told is something that they're definitely looking out for. I've been invited to just work on little working groups, just for little projects, just by letting the right people know that I want to help any way I can. I have some skill sets. If they are useful, let me know, and I'm happy to help. And sometimes it's as simple as making sure the right people know that, or making sure everyone knows that, then the opportunities will open.
Okay, thank you, guys. I think, Michael, we're out of time, but I'd like to maybe throw it out open for questions. A couple more minutes, that's fine. Do we have any questions from the audience for the panel? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to just commend all of you on that and point to the education part. I wanted to
tag on to the education part, I agree with you. I'm from Los Angeles, and I'm on a board of a school, James Cameron School, Muse. And we do a full passionate situation, but we have a sister school in Burma, Thailand. And what I learned from that is that you're right, you got to kind of integrate and get resources and mixture. So what I really believe that on the same time, you should be evangelizing to all these schools that are out there in America and telling them about what you can copy, cookie cut, bring here, and kind of have some type of shared interest with that. And I'd like to pass it to you. How are you doing that to solve that? How are you solving that, like integrating with schools?
Well, of course, Rob. I would actually say one thing. So education is incredibly important, as we all know. We all agree on that. My advice, and this is something that I received from the local people when I first came into the island, is educate yourself about the history of this island. Because it's very easy for us to say, oh my gosh, this is the way things done in San Francisco, in New York. Why has it not been done here on this island? Well, the answer is it's a very dense, rich history on this island. And I mean, I'm looking at you, Jorge. I mean, look, you can tell me all the things I need to know about Puerto Rico that I did not know before, or Pedro, right? But look, there's so many things that we don't know. When we first came to this island, I made so many mistakes assuming things last year about the way that things should have been done. And I don't think that would be a good thing to just say, we educate you as guests onto your home on how things should be done. I think it should be both ways. Yes.
Like I mentioned, I operated a social impact accelerator similar to what I'm doing here in Newark, New Jersey. And for those of you who don't know, it's like the Bayamon or the Compton of New Jersey. It's a really rough neighborhood. And we ran a program called Newark Kids Code. And what we did is just that. So we took kids from the New Jersey Institute of Technology, the college kids, and we had them come in and mentor the middle school kids. So you don't have someone from the outside, you have someone that's from the community, the older version of yourself, coming and teaching middle school kids how to code, and then getting them excited about computer science so that 4 or 5 years down the line, when they are going into the university, they're excited about technology, right? So getting them excited at a young age, taking them on a tour of the campus, taking them to Maya West and taking them, hey, this is the university. These are the opportunities that are available, and having young adults or young kids, 18, 19-year-old kids, teaching the youth someone that they can relate to, right? So I really think like grassroots efforts, and to comment on your point, like to make it happen, it's really boots on the ground. It's getting your feet dirty. It's rolling up your sleeves and going to a high school like we did last week, you know? And all it takes is one person. You don't need a huge coalition. If we decide next week that we want to hop in a Jeep and go to a high school, we can contact the administrations of these various schools all around the island, and they are very open to working with us. And I think money is amazing, and I'm so grateful for the contributions that you've made. And I think the next step is to start integrating our ideas. One of the big problems is that there's not a lot of jobs here, like high-paying tech jobs on the island. So the smartest kids, the kids that are coming out of Maya West and UPR, and that they study computer science, they're going to Silicon Valley and New York to get jobs. So not only does their money leave the economy, but now their ideas leave the economy. They're not able to mentor. So as we're coming down here, we need to, one, be creating jobs, and then also creating mentorship, going and talking at events like you're doing now, and not only spreading financial wealth, but spreading the wealth of ideas. And thank you for the contributions that you
made.
made.
We're going to take last comments, and I know we could talk about this a lot. I'd like to just take one last comment from Ahmed and Michelangelo, because we haven't heard much from them today, and then we're going to have to call it. But I appreciate all your comments. Thank you, guys.
So there's one thing I want to say. So essentially, I think there's a big misunderstanding when it comes to how people kind of perceive Puerto Ricans when they come here. It's not like we need any saviors or anything, or like just on our knees, like, please save us. We're not a bunch of monkeys just staring at fire like, oh my God, you invented this. In this case, you know, equality, right? We have the same intellectual capacity than anyone in the world, right? So if you're here to invest, invest. Invest in the right projects. We have a very healthy startup ecosystem that's growing through things like Engine 4, P18, so invest. But invest smartly. I'm not saying like just because it's Puerto Rico you should invest. If it's not a good deal, damn it, don't invest. It's not a good deal. And if you're here to build, you should focus and build. It's crypto winter. And if your company dies, we lose too, because we're all like trying to get to that North Star, which is getting to, we all believe in Web 3.0, right? The next evolution where everyone has the same opportunities, right? That's the goal. So if you're here to invest, invest. And if you're here to build. You can also help, right? That's something everyone should do, every human, right? Whenever possible. But it doesn't mean that you should, I guess, treat Puerto Ricans as people that need help or need saving in any way. So.
No, absolutely. And just to touch on that point real quick, the problems that I'm addressing, they're not unique to Puerto Rico. AI and automation is disrupting jobs all across the country. The trucking industry is about to get disrupted by Tesla when they automate the driving of trucks, right? So these problems, they exist all around the country, and they not only need to be addressed here in Puerto Rico, they need to be addressed around the world. But I think if we attack the education system now, we're going to have unlimited opportunities in the future.
Thank you. Ahmed, last thought.
Okay. So I was in Istanbul like 3 days ago, and there was a hackathon, and there was, out of 100 universities, there was 15 projects. And it was very interesting. So they brought these ideas, but what they did, they built teams in each university that was representing blockchain. And some of the ideas were like very interesting, and they got investors on board. Long story short, I spent 3 days there. In the end of the third day, we decided to open the Satoshi Cafe in Istanbul also, with partnership with this company called Blockfellow. And all they do just train, college students for blockchain. And I think that's something we could do it here too. And then the second thing is about the Satoshi Cafe. I'm not trying to make money from coffee. I love coffee. I'm not trying to make money from coffee or from the space. So from what I saw in healthcare space, there's a lot of businesses that's just not sustainable, or economy is not sustainable. And I got 2 little kids, and I don't want to live in a bubble. I don't want my kids to live in a bubble either. So we have to do something. We have responsibility, and I just want to play my role in this. So that's all.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
And we had 2 up before, and if you see a problem with it, solve it. Bring me 6 more Puerto Rican entrepreneurs next year. So don't go anywhere, because this is not CoinAgenda Puerto Rico, this is CoinAgenda Caribbean. And this is actually, I'd say, our lowest percentage of like non-Puerto Rico Caribbeans attending, and I think it's again because there's no ICOs coming here. From other places. We are in the midst of the crypto winter, and I think a lot of the crypto winter we're going to be addressing on our last panel, which is how the heck, if you have a great idea, do you do it in a compliant manner and in which jurisdiction? We heard this morning that, at least from the DDEC's perspective, you can do an ICO, and the question is, what do the lawyers think? And certainly what people have been doing, because there still are ICOs, just not $1 billion a month anymore. We are going to be talking next. So we're going to be making up for the low quantity of people from other Caribbean regions by the quality, which is the next 2 guests that we have as speakers are both addressed Your Excellency. So we are setting up right now, and I guess, Erica, you'll tell me when it's ready, with His Excellency, the Honorable Don G. Cornish, who is the Governor of Grand Bahama. So I guess we'll hear a little bit about Bahama from the governor from Grand Bahama. But the Bahamas, for those of you, how many people have been to the Bahamas? Raise your hands. I mean, it's one of the more popular Caribbean jurisdictions for travel, just because it's so close to Miami. They're a part of the Bahamas that are only, in fact, I believe Grand Bahama is only about 50 miles. I think Bimini's even closer. And yet it's like, I think like 100,000 square meters, some crazy number of, if you look at Wikipedia, of oceans surrounding about, 900 islands. And so it's an interesting place. I actually spoke at the, I think it was probably the first security token conference. It was the Polymath conference, Polycon, last year, and they held it in Nassau, another part of the Bahamas. And the prime minister actually came out and said, bring us your ICO, bring us your security tokens, bring us your cryptocurrency. We want you on the island. And that's been sort of the general philosophy of the Caribbean nations that are not part of the United States. And so there's really been kind of a competition. And again, what I was saying before about the good cops and the bad cops, again, all of these places that are sort of competing for jurisdictions, the good cops, which are usually the economic development arms, will say, come on down, no taxes, and then you got to find out what the banks say and what the regulators say in terms of like how many days do you need to be on there, how many people do you have to hire to do an offering out of there, and and then you have to make decisions as an entrepreneur. What's your risk reward? Are you going to have a substantially lower risk of an SEC audit by going to some place that you have to maybe hire 4 people to go to and keep them there year round? Are we good? Okay, we're going to test. So you're going to put it up here? Okay. So we're having some history here. Okay. And you want to do it sideways then? Or you I mean, sideways meets the screen. Oh, but it's going up like that. Okay. Okay. Okay, is this live?
Hey, Don, can you hear me? Okay, try speaking into...
Your Excellency, how is the day going for you? Okay, fantastic. We're actually in the same time zone over here in San Juan. So you needed to do something? Okay. Okay, we're just changing the audio here for a second.
How do I go to the home?
Okay, that's good. And then we're going to pipe that into here. Okay. Over there. Okay, so everybody can hear me. Can we hear Governor Cornish? We can't, I don't think. Can you hear it in the audience? Okay, you want to amp that up a little bit. Okay, so we're here at the 3rd annual CoinAgenda Caribbean. I was just saying that I asked how many people in the audience have been to the Bahamas, and about half of them have actually been to the Bahamas, so that's good. I actually was a speaker at the first security token conference in the Bahamas, actually I think in the whole Caribbean region, that was the Polymath conference last February. That you were there? Okay. And so I was just saying that it struck me that most of the Caribbean countries, nations, are showing a friendliness to our industry, and then you have to just sort of read the fine print. and see, okay, they're all pretty much zero tax. What are the what's the fine print? How many days do you have to spend on the island as the founders? How many employees do you have to hire? What's the banking situation? So I guess I would start just with what is sort of Bahamas, and in particular Grand Bahama, because I know you have a free trade district. What is your sort of interest in the blockchain industry, and what do you have to say to people who are entrepreneurs who are looking for a friendly jurisdiction to locate their businesses?
One of the things that has sorry.
It's okay.
One of the things that has happened, Parliament has taken a very nationalistic approach. The Prime Minister himself has declared that he would like to see Grand Bahama as the tech hub of the Caribbean, which is a very bold and a very aggressive stance. And in keeping with that, legislation has been drafted and has been communicated among the various stakeholders in the private sector as well as in the government regulatory sector, the central bank to the Securities and Exchange Commission, so that we can have the right framework for digital assets and of exchanges in the Bahamas. Grand Bahama is expected to lead the way in that respect.
So, are there different rules within the different jurisdictions of the Bahamas, like there are, say, in Switzerland, where Zug might have slightly different rules than Zurich, or is it, or are the laws pretty much the same across the Bahamas, but maybe some of the incentives are different in different jurisdictions, sub-jurisdictions like Grand Bahama?
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. We have a district called Seaport, which is the self-governing section of Grand Bahama Island, where I am, and they have a free trade zone arrangement with the government, which allows them to provide exemption and incentives to people who wish to involve themselves in industry. So there'll be no exception in terms of the national law, but the law will provide that the digital assets of the exchanges and SPOs will be managed according to what the legislation says it will. But that is how persons who wish to come in to set up in Freeport will have added benefits because of the number of factors that the charge of agencies or entities outside of the city of Freeport.
So obviously we're talking about maybe three different distinct types of blockchain businesses. One would be, the type of business that has utility tokens, so that those are typically taxed in many other jurisdictions globally. The second would be security token, where they're perhaps also looking for the ability to be listed maybe on the Bahamas Stock Exchange or listed on other exchanges as they begin to accept tokenized securities, like the Canadian Stock Exchange has just started to do. And the third one would be just a non-tokenized, industry, like a wallet company or a mining company or an exchange. So let's take those one by one. On the utility token side, I know that Cayman claims to have had, I think, $4 billion worth of ICOs going through them. Have you been tracking how many sort of utility token offerings have gone through the Bahamas? And is that something that you're still actively looking to accommodate, or are you more focused on security tokens?
Well, I've heard rumors about what has happened in that space, but officially we haven't had a tremendous amount of activity as far as I'm aware. There are companies that have been making inquiries. I think in many instances it's been a wait and see until the legislation has passed the draft stage and actually enacted in a few months' time. We expect that legislation will happen in the Parliament by the middle of this year, about June, and come into force. And I think that was part of the reason why there was a lot of reluctance at the beginning. But we've passed that legislation that has come down and it's been discussed, and that is kind of allow people to have a certain degree of comfort. So the interest level is high, but we haven't had, the kind of activity at Cayman and Bermuda has had so far. But anticipate that given the level of interest, that it's going to actually pick up pace once the legislation is enforced. So it will speak to all three of those.
Okay. And so for those types of offerings, what's a good form of contact? Should they go through the Bahamas Blockchain Association? Should they go to your office? What are the best ways? Should they look at find different attorneys who are familiar with Bahamas laws? What's the best way for somebody in the utility token market to sort of get engaged?
What is happening is it's going to actually allow for a lot more flexibility than that. In this instance, we have enough professional attorneys as well as persons who are chartered accountants and firms that provide services to the chartered accountants, different services, as well as the bill in the present stage by persons who will be approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission to be involved in the business full time, whether they call themselves an association or they want to form an actual firm that specializes in building a quote-unquote sponsor with professional qualifications with knowledge of blockchain and crypto. And they will be in a position to provide that service independent of being involved with an actual law firm or accounting firm or offshore bank, as the case may be. So the bill takes into account steps and factors and categories which will provide for greater flexibility. Once those persons have the approval, they're registered with the Securities Commission, because of course we have to ensure that those persons take into account anti-terrorism, anti-money laundering, and other KYC requirements that they enter into the formal business or engaging company.
Okay, and then since security tokens are getting a slow start, and part of it is because it's hard to find places that will list them or that'll have good clarity of rules about listing tokens. What is sort of the regulatory oversight and particularly also just with the stock market that you have? Are you looking at having tokenized securities up and running this year?
Yeah, definitely. Once the legislation comes forth, I anticipate that the activity this year. That's not good because things that have been formed and they've actually gone to explore the market. I think a holdback for them and to get licensing from the exchange. And so once this legislation happens, we just put the floodgates because that's the one point simply want to have clear so that they actually have a degree of security and working with them as they get their business in the various aspects. And so the bill in present form take all that into account. The consultation will allow for the Securities Commission to have the mission and the responsibility to operate in a way that will take into account a vibrant sector, not unlike what happened 100 years ago when we came into the business of offshore banking. Well, for many years, this was be dominated in this region, and we would expect often it's Switzerland of the Caribbean. So we intend fully to be the trendsetters, ahead of the curve, in terms of the way to be bring blockchain into 21st century Bahamas. So that's our goal.
Okay. I'd like to see if there's any questions from the audience on Grand Bahama as a jurisdiction. Any of the lawyers in the audience? Oh, what's the best time of year to visit Grand Bahama?
The Bahamas has always been called, you know, I like to tell the story about George Washington, first president of the United States, referred to the Bahamas as the Isles of Perpetual Youth. And right now, the temperature is about 82 degrees outside. And this is our winter.
I think it's about 82 in Puerto Rico too, but obviously you're closer to Miami, so a little bit of a mix of the climates.
Yeah, what happens with us is this time of year we have some cold from the U.S. North Coast that comes. We call it a cold front. It lasts for a few hours, maybe a day or so, and it's just basically just cool a little bit. But it's sunny most of the time, and you get rain, but it's not something that lasts very long. And I like to tell people when they ask the question if it rains in the Bahamas, they say yes. But actually, it's not rain; it's liquid sunshine.
So let me ask.
We've been for a long time. You know, there's a whole lot of Bahamas. If you're in the northern Bahamas, the temperatures are completely different from the southern Bahamas. We have 700 islands, and so we have lots of places to play, and to come in and kind of take a break from the blockchain industry when they want to kind of let their head down a little bit.
So are there going to be any events that we should look to attend in? Oops, did we just lose it? Are there any events that the industry should look to attend in Freeport or in Grand Bahama in 2019 to sort of showcase some of the capabilities?
Yes, the blockchain is going to begin in June, right, in Bahama, and I'm sure that we'll share that information. I'll be happy to get that to you. But it's an international conference that people from the region who come talk about what's happening in the industry, have updates on what's happening in the Bahamas as far as
Great. Well, we'll get that information from your assistant, and we'll share the link with everyone in our Telegram chat so that they can be aware of it. Any sort of final remarks that you can sort of let people know about why they should be doing business in Grand Bahama and what you're going to be looking like in terms of a blockchain community in the next 5 years?
I think the Bahamas will very much be the place in the world for blockchain, not just in the Caribbean. 5 years, it's a whole lot of time to get ahead and alter places that are leading the way at this stage. And I think quality of the service is comparable because we have a legacy as well in offshore investment. It's going to be no exception. A lot of trained professionals in the industry, from attorneys, persons, financial experts, as well as who are serious about ensuring that we get and so stay tuned. The Bahamas is a statement that's going to be very loud and it's going to speak volumes about the quality of the environment that we're going to create for the chain in the Caribbean and in the world.
Okay. Any last questions before we let the governor go back to governing? Your Excellency, thank you for sharing this information with us, and thank you for your time, and look forward to meeting you sometime in the Bahamas.
Yes, look forward to seeing you. Thank you for having me.
Okay.
All the best in the country.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay. Next up, Bermuda. Let's see if we can fix the bandwidth a little bit.
You know, it's because he was on his phone.
It could have been his phone? Okay.
Yeah, it's because he was on his phone.
Okay. So I guess I have a little dead air while we're teeing up the... Can I get this one live? It's on? It's on? Hello? Hello, okay. So I have dead air, so I guess I'll just not waste dead air. How's everybody enjoying the conference so far? Obviously, it's a lot smaller than it was last year, but hopefully more intimate and hopefully good quality.
What do you think? Do you think the hot money is gone and the people who are here are the poor people who are actually going to build something that makes a difference in 5 years?
I think the hot money comes and goes, and I think the people who stay around during the cold times are the visionaries and the builders. And that happened in 2015. I mean, you know, I like to say that, you know, the stock market is fairly predictable in that it's 7 to 10 year very slow bull markets that then gets overheated, then it crashes and the governments have to rush in and, you know, basically print more money and somehow the rich end up with it and the middle class gets wiped out. Wash and repeat over the last 100 years since they started the Fed. It's different in the blockchain because everything so far tends to follow the price of Bitcoin, just like the rest of the world economy has been following the dollar for the last 80 years or so. And there you end up having, instead of long, slow bull markets with a quick crash, you have a parabolic run-up, sometimes as little as 2 or 3 months, followed by a long, slow crash.
I'm going to call.
Okay. And we saw that, you know, really a couple of times in the first 4 years because the trends were just establishing themselves, and your linear, fairly linear growth in usage is exponential in the beginning, because if you're growing, say, on average 100,000 new users a month or something, that first one that goes from 100 to 1,000 or to 10,000 is a much higher percentage than when you add even, you know, 1 million in a month when you're at 100 million. So, but the halving is real, and the halving is basically when you cut your inflation in half. The first 4 years, which is before all but maybe 2 or 3 people at this conference were not yet into Bitcoin. You know, that's when most of the Bitcoin were mined of what's out there. There's 17.5 million out there right now, a little bit short of that, and 10 million of them were mined between the Genesis block and November of 2012, because it was 7,200 per day, and then one day it dropped to 3,600, and it took about a year for the increased demand and the lowered supply to get to this kind of squeeze where you had a parabolic run-up. And then, of course, the parabolic run-up overshot the marker where it probably should have been, because this is human nature. Oh, it's going up, buy. Buy what's going up, sell what's going down is, you know, typically what happens in herd mentalities. And so from the first halving, November 2012, $4, to the peak 13 months later, it was a 300x run-up. And yet that's small compared to what happened in 2010, 2011, when you know, went from a tenth of a cent to $30, you know, in a similar period of time. And then you crashed down to $1. So, but that was when there was only, you know, thousands of people, not millions of people. The very first run-up, I mean, I think they were estimating maybe a couple 100,000 people in 2012 globally that had wallets.
Can you share the metrics that you and I spoke about that, though? It's really interesting how it looked like this is dead.
Yep.
Based on some of the metrics which have nothing to do with price, it's still growing significantly. Like
Correct.
wallet size,
Correct.
average daily user.
Correct. All those things have been fairly linear, and sentiment is based on price, right? So when it crashes, and it's been following it this last cycle, which again, these are 4-year cycles based on the physical fact of a halving. You had a repeat of this in the current cycle, 2016, when it then dropped from 7,200 a day to 3,600 a day to we're currently at 1,800 a day, and next May we're going to drop to 900 a day. And then in 4 years it's 450, then 225. The last million coins will take 100 years. So at that point, you're essentially at zero inflation. And right now we're getting to the point where we're going to be dropping below what the inflation of gold is. And for the first time, we're going to be dropping from like 3.8% inflation to 1.8 or 1.6 or something. Well, I have a bet with a gold bug that Bitcoin was going to outperform gold over a 5-year period. I think we're about two years in. The price of gold at the time, I believe, was about 1,100, and Bitcoin was 550. So I'm looking pretty good. But you never know what's going to happen in the next 3 years. I mean, gold could shoot up to 20,000, and Bitcoin could break because Craig Wright is Satoshi, and he dumps all of his Genesis block coins, and the people who buy him up panic. But other than black swan events, the genius of sort of the way Bitcoin was programmed was to reward early believers before there was much to believe in. Naval Ravikant from AngelList called it the world's greatest pyramid scheme. Not Ponzi scheme, pyramid scheme. Like, Amway. I mean, the people who got it in the beginning had to believe, but if they held on to something that cost them 1/10 of a cent, they're pretty fabulously wealthy today. There was a lot of Bitcoins available for the taking. Just run a simple computer program, and you didn't even need anything other than just a normal laptop. Today you need basically, it's over 1 trillion times as hard to get 1 Bitcoin, and the daily increments are 1/4 what they were, and about to become 1/8. How are we doing, Erica?
Oh, they're set. I'm set up. They said they're not ready till 4:45.
Oh, okay.
Though.
All right.
So you can make the announcements for the opening party. And
Why don't you?
Parties. Okay.
Erica.
Hi, I'm Erica. Just as a reminder, if you're not already on the Telegram or Bizzabo community, join it. There's also the links to all the recordings on the message boards. Tonight's party is at the boardwalk on the pool floor from 6 to 8 p.m. And then there's a Goldfinger party afterwards. So there's a little bit more information on that. We'll send that in the Telegram group too. Tomorrow's legendary dinner will be from 5:30 to 9:30. We'll be running shuttles from the front of the hotel from 5 to 5:30, and then I'll drop you back from 9 to 9:30 if you wanted to come back here. There's another Goldfinger after party that night too. Sundays is going to be at the pool bar. You'll probably see it later as well. I think that one's from 5 to 7. You'll need your badge for everything, so make sure that you have that and don't lose it. Or if you do lose it, ask for another one. I don't think there's any more. I don't know what time it is. Oh, the first stop for the shuttles after the legendary dinner is it here, or is it the other one? Is the El San Juan, and that's where you can get dropped off for the Goldfinger after party. And then the second one is Intercontinental San Juan, which is this hotel, and you can have the rest of your night to yourself. So you just have 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And she's going to call it.
So Goldfinger is one of about 6 conferences that's going on simultaneously, and they wanted to do a joint party tomorrow. They also have their own party tonight that anybody is invited to after our party, and it is at Vivo Beach. That one doesn't have shuttles because it's just, you want to go there, it's about 3 minutes away. It's Vivo Beach, and I think they're from 8 to 11. It's their conference, but they've comped anybody with a badge into both their own party as well as the joint party we're doing tomorrow night. And again, the after party tomorrow night is basically at the El San Juan, which is literally right next door. But we'll drop people off at the El San Juan first, and then the Intercontinental, because again, they are right next door to each other, about a 5-minute walk down the sidewalk. And then, of course, it's a beautiful day. There's a lot of people, I think, taking advantage of the sunshine instead of listening to the politicians and lawyers last half of the day here. But and the excuse me. the cocktail party, we're gonna, it's gonna be 6 to 8 and lots of food and drink. So, so I think we've got about what, five. You're gonna alert me when.
2 minutes, yeah. She said she's gonna call.
Okay, so again, our next speaker, we're upgrading from governor to premier. So this is the guy who runs the country, not just a state within the country. And I actually met David Burt at the Miami conference, North American Bitcoin conference in January, where Bermuda seems to be putting on a pretty dedicated effort to embrace the blockchain community. I mean, I've had several attorneys tell me that if you look at sort of all the jurisdictions in the Caribbean, if you're going offshore, the ones that tend to be the most respected in kind of order, and I guess we'll talk with Manny and see if he agrees with this, but our Bermuda #1, that's where a lot of Fortune 500 companies are, and then Bahamas, #2, and then #3 is Cayman, and #4 is BVI. Everything after that is just, sort of a little bit less kind of automatic in terms of like someone saying, oh yeah, that's a fine jurisdiction. And then the ones that are at the other end of the spectrum where you get some raised eyebrows are, St. Kitts and Nevis, just because, they've got things like, you can be anonymous and a few other things that, is good for privacy, but maybe not good for investors if you're looking for just something that checks all the boxes. Same thing with Panama. But there's a lot of, I think ever since FATCA and FBAR made the offshore banking a little bit of a smaller industry, everybody in the Caribbean finance industry has been looking where are they going to employ people? Where are they going to get their next piece of business from? And I think they're all looking at the blockchain, both the security token side and the utility token side, as a good, full employment act for their lawyers and their accountants, and the way of also, potentially in places that actually have a bunch of people providing jobs. I think, with almost no exceptions, I think Barbados has got a few initiatives to train people in technology. Most of these places, though, you're not going to be looking at going and having, your technology centers there. Puerto Rico, you can. I mean, I think the entire population of Bermuda is about 60,000 people. Although I think it is actually one of the wealthiest countries in the world of those 60,000 people, because they've got so much. They're kind of like the Switzerland, I guess, of the Caribbean in some ways. A lot of banking there. And how are we looking?
She said 1 minute a minute ago. So
Okay. So I guess I'll go back to talking about actually. Is there any water here? Or is this kind of old? Yeah, if you just get a clean glass, you could use a little water before the next talk. So I was going to continue with what Rob had asked about in terms of where things are going, at least if they follow the same trajectory, which would be you had a 300x gain from the bottom of the first halving to the top of the overshoot of 2013, and then you had a crash in January of 2015, which is basically the comparable point to where we are at now. Or actually, we're right now at about where April of 2015 was, because the actual bottom was 150, and you never know the bottom until you're in the rearview mirror and you're like, oh, that was the bottom. Because at 150, people are going, oh, is it going to go back down under 100? But it didn't. And that wasn't really confirmed until April, when they had what the traders Is Jim Lowry here? I know he was here earlier. He's going to be talking about this tomorrow. He's a master trader, and I think is that the Golden Cross? Anyway, there's a lot of terms, but it's basically where it's a bear cross where it basically confirms that that was the bottom of the market because of the different moving averages converging, and that's often when people start buying. And so we just hit that like a week ago, kind of a confirmation that December was probably it. And that's when a lot of people start looking at buying, and I think you did find a run up from about 3,300 to almost 4,200, and when it hit just a little bit below 4,200, 4,190, it just dropped in like 30 minutes back down into the 3,700s. And you're going to expect that's known as sideways action to probably happen for the next 6 months or so until about 6 months before the halving, the last time and the time before, you started having people anticipate the halving and the price will start moving up. So my personal prediction, not financial advice, is that we're going to probably stay between 3,000 and 5,000 until maybe the fall, September, October, and then you're going to probably go over 6 and maybe over 7, which is, you know, almost double from where we were at the start of the year. So even though it's still a big drop from where we were December 2017, it should still get people excited about, oh, if we're at 7 and we were at 35 at the beginning of the year, when are we going to get to 15? And so we'll see where we're going to be at in May. May 2020 will be the next halving, and I'm guessing we'll be somewhere between 10 and 15,000. And because the first halving on much lower numbers had a 300x and the second halving had a 30x, I'm just looking logically that the next one may be 3x. And if that's the case, then you'd be between 30 and 45,000 at its peak, which twice in a row now, so I'm projecting it'll probably be 3 times in a row, will be not December 2020, but November or December of 2021. So that's my call. New all-time high, November or December 2021. Also, tracking the CoinAgenda bounce. Every CoinAgenda, I believe without fail, the price of Bitcoin has been higher at the end of the show than it was at the beginning. So we'll see if we're going to break the record. It was 38.60 this morning when we started, and so we'll see at the closing party whether it's above. Even $1 counts if it's above or below. I look at CoinMarketCap. That's the average. Actually, Brad Mills dubbed it the CoinAgenda bump. And how are we doing?
If you want to look, she's messaging me.
No, here, let me just say. Just type benefits of having your company in Bermuda, what you're trying to promote. Okay. Let them know I discussed this with the premier at Satoshi Roundtable in person.
Okay, great. Hi. So we are getting you logged in.
No, we're keeping ours off. Oh, actually, it is on. So this is sort of a light may turn that off just for bandwidth purposes. But, so I'm Michael Turpin, I'll be asking the questions. I met with the premier in Miami as well as at Satoshi Roundtable. Okay. Good afternoon, Your Excellency. I'm doing very well. So let's see. We're still getting you plugged in, so you're not on the big screen yet. Okay. But we're doing is it a sound check, Erica, or is it a video check? So I'm looking forward to coming down to Bermuda in a couple weeks. Absolutely. Yeah. So we've got the crowd at CoinAgenda here, and we just heard from the governor of Grand Bahama to tell us why that's the best jurisdiction, and we're now going to hear. Yep. So. Well, you know, the Caribbean nations always have competed with each other on, you know, different points when it was investment banks or when it was, you know, offshore jurisdictions for venture funds, and this is just a new market. And you know, it certainly impressed me that you know, showed up with a pretty large presence in Miami, and then you showed up at the Satoshi Roundtable, and you know, so that really showed some commitment. And your staff wearing, you know, the Bermuda shorts, couldn't miss those. Okay.
I'm gonna try plugging you in.
Okay, we're gonna plug you in now. Okay. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, great.
Which one's the audio on?
Yeah, you got to turn the audio on.
Can you speak?
I can speak.
Hello?
Okay, you can speak too. You hear him? Yeah. Just say hello to the crowd. Hello, CoinAgenda, and we'll see if we can hear you.
Hello, CoinAgenda.
All right. Okay. So it's our distinct pleasure here to have the premier of Bermuda, E. David Burt, who I met in Miami when he showed up with a contingent of business development and government people, all dressed in colorful Bermuda shorts. And you couldn't miss them. And then he also was, I believe, the first head of state to be invited to the Satoshi Roundtable, which is a gathering of the top blockchain leaders in the world. It's once a year, usually in the Caribbean. And so I've generally been told that that Bermuda has been historically considered, you know, sort of the top jurisdiction for Fortune 500 companies wanting to go offshore, and but that it was just way too expensive for blockchain companies to consider. And as I understand it, you've got some new initiatives that are going to be addressing sort of what a startup can do to go and, you know, do either a utility token as that market comes back, looking at launching an exchange, or doing a security token. And so, Your Excellency, if you'd like to sort of just address that in general, the crowd is very interested.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael. And I'm sorry that I could not be there in person. I'm actually in my office in the House of Assembly as Parliament is currently going on, as we are debating the budget that the government delivered last week, which from the Bermuda perspective is the first balanced budget that we've had in a very long time. So that's something that is very good. From our perspective, and where Bermuda plans to play inside of this market is very simple. That Bermuda has always prided itself for being a very high-quality jurisdiction. We have a very high standard of regulation. Our Bermuda Monetary Authority is a very highly regarded regulator, and with the regulation that comes from that, gives certainty for certain companies. So Bermuda was one of the first countries in the world to have specific legislation governing the issuance of digital assets. Our legislation was broad, so it was not limited just to any type of coin offering, but it's also broad enough for security token offerings and utility token offerings. We also have a full suite of legislation that is in place for the licensing of digital asset businesses. Those are whether they're exchange providers, custody persons, custody providers, wallet providers, or companies that are looking to issue digital assets for their particular clients. So we have a full license regime which is set up for all of those particular issues. In addition to that, companies here have the ability to not only be able to set up on our shores, but also have access to expedited work permits for any companies in which they for any employees that they may wish to transfer to our jurisdiction to work on the projects that are based out of Bermuda. Our ecosystem that we're attempting to build here in Bermuda is something that basically mirrors what we've done for financial services. Bermuda is the world's risk capital. There are only 2 countries in the world that have risk equivalents to both the United States and the European Union, and that is Bermuda and Switzerland. So we have a very high quality of regulation, very high standards. And the one thing about Bermuda is that we're not trying to be everything to all people. We know that we have a very high standard of regulation. We know that it's not easy to get into our market, but we're only looking for the most high quality companies that want to be a part of an ecosystem or trade on the name from Bermuda that basically says that you have the standard of approval from one of the toughest regulators on the planet. That's what we plan to be. It's important that we diversify our financial services offering. We certainly believe that the future is in digital assets, and that's the reason why an international financial services center such as Bermuda wants to ensure that we can attract digital asset companies to Bermuda to be a part of it.
Fantastic. Now, from the exchange perspective, oops, did we lose the sound? Oh,
Hopefully not.
You know, it was just a delay. Your mouth was still moving after the sound stopped, but we heard you. Okay, so from the exchange perspective, as I recall, you're looking at having exchanges with utility tokens, with security tokens, being available on one exchange regulatory regime, correct? So you could actually have someone issue both under the same licensing formats?
Absolutely. The digital asset business license itself will govern the issuing of whatever it is. So there's 2 different aspects. So any particular company can launch a digital asset from Bermuda. That does not require you to have a digital asset business license. That just requires you to have a Bermuda company. And you could use a digital asset business license person in order to launch that on any particular exchange. But the issuance of the digital asset is under one particular act, which is our Companies Act, and that's available for any Bermuda company. So, for instance, this is similar to, I would say, other industries. If you're looking to launch some type of special purpose vehicle, if you were just looking on doing a tokenized asset and doing it through that format, you can issue those assets from Bermuda in a Bermuda company. Regarding the exchanges, the Digital Asset Business Act governs the licensing of digital asset business companies. So if you are an exchange and you want to be licensed and regulated underneath the Bermuda platform, there's a long suite of regulations in which you have to comply with. But once you meet those standards, then you're able to operate an exchange on Bermuda. And the reason why we know that this is attractive is because with our high standard of regulation, it gives comfort that you're not going to have a Puerto Rico.
That's great, and we actually have the team from Velocity Ledger here. They'll be speaking tomorrow on the STO Exchanges panel, so we'll hear a little bit more about some of the things that they're looking to do in Bermuda.
Absolutely.
And I know that your background before you became Premier, you actually had a technology background, not sort of a typical politician. You want to tell us a little bit about some of your technology chops?
Well, I've always been a techno geek, I guess you would say. I wrote my first computer program at the age of 12. I wrote transformed my father's manual payroll processing to an automated system, but this was way back when. I think I wrote it in Turbo Pascal, if you can imagine that. But I've been doing programming for quite a while. My master's work was in information systems development. I came back to Bermuda in 2003, built a number of government systems, different systems for the private sector. And in 2015, probably my favorite project that I ever worked on, I launched a ride-hailing app service in Bermuda, which is the only reliable one that works. And we are continuing to be in existence to this day, providing services to Bermuda residents and tourists alike. Unfortunately, I don't get to do that day-to-day anymore. That's because I have another type of job that I'm involved in. But technology is, I would say that from the technology perspective, technology is my background, and that's the reason why Bermuda has just driven so quickly ahead in the technology space. What we want to do is provide that environment so companies feel free to come to our shores and to innovate from our shores. And I think it's the ideal place to export your goods and services to the world from a tax-neutral jurisdiction that has a very high level of regulation and has an excellent reputation.
And you're also about an hour and a half from New York City, correct?
Absolutely, and it takes you longer to get to Midtown to the airport sometimes than it'll actually take you to get wheels down from New York to Bermuda. It's the proximity to the East Coast. Clearly, that is one of our hallmarks. Direct services, of course, daily to Toronto, London, and New York, and so it's just an ideal place for business where we are located. I heard you mention something about expensive earlier. I push back on that. Bermuda is certainly not a low-cost jurisdiction, but I also want to say that for a place where where we have access to excellent legal resources, excellent accounting resources, excellent business resources, and now we also offer the ability for any company that has gone through our regulatory process with a deal that we announced yesterday with Signature Bank that will provide banking services as well.
So I know it's not low cost on the security side. I believe that Sean from Velocity was telling me that there was some kind of set price for some of the utility token offerings that was going to sort of keep the price within a certain grid or something like that. Am I mistaken on that?
Absolutely. I don't have the pricing information just in front of me. What I can say again is that Bermuda is not going to be the ideal jurisdiction for all persons. We're the type of jurisdiction in which we are, with a large number of physical presence, highly regulated industries such as insurance and asset management. We just need to make sure that our barriers make sure that they're there to make sure that we only have serious players inside of our market.
Understood. And I guess when I'm saying low cost, it's maybe in comparison to Silicon Valley lawyers, New York lawyers, and perhaps what a Fortune 500 company would be charged to do something in Bermuda, as opposed to some of the new initiatives on the blockchain. I know it's always great to have. I mean, you may be one of the few heads of state that has a technology background, and that certainly is helpful. You know, Bill Gates once said he's still the best programmer at Microsoft. He just doesn't have time to do it anymore. And so I remember, you know, you've had some interesting thoughts, even in terms of like, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, currencies in the Caribbean that would be state issued or state sponsored. And I know you had some ideas about what a stablecoin offering might look like for Bermuda. Are you able to talk about that a little bit? I know it's
I can. I know that there are companies that are looking to do things here in Bermuda. There was an announcement that came out about a month ago from Stablehouse.io. They're looking up to set up a stablecoin clearance in Bermuda. But from the perspective of the Bermuda government itself, we've been working with the Digital Currency Initiative with MIT to launch our own version of the Bermuda dollar. It's something that we're looking to pilot later this year. It's one of the tracks of which we're on this year to make sure that we can get that out. And we just want to make sure that we build on what we did last year in providing regulatory certainty for companies in the digital asset industry. From the perspective of our coin, though, when it is issued, it is an interesting thing, because the one thing I say is that right now we technically have a token. That token, however, is just in paper form. Every Bermuda dollar is backed 1-for-1 with the US dollar as it stands already. So it's an easier transition to just transition that to a digital version of that, as opposed to, or a tokenized version of that, as opposed to what exists now on paper.
But that would still be massive to be able to have a digital, you know, Bermuda dollar that's pegged to the U.S. dollar. I remember one of the possible options was having it pegged to U.S. T-bills owned by Bermuda, and there's other different options. But it'll be fascinating to see you work these things through, because obviously, you know, we had a report from the from the governor's office of Puerto Rico this morning about the things they're looking at, and they're really starting with the government. It's interesting, just sort of like using blockchain for government transparency and using the blockchain to be able to track where donations for certain programs go to, and just putting it all on the blockchain. They're working with Consensus and a few other folks to put that through, and I think that's actually great because there's perhaps not as many technologists in the government here, and if they can see it working in things that they're familiar with and the efficiencies of that, it becomes less scary than when you're saying, oh, we're actually doing an exchange, or this was sort of the first kind of public coming out of the San Juan Mercantile Exchange, which is going to, be based here, but will be, offering things like back does, except it'll settle. It'll be cash settlement, and they'll get folks like the Charles Schwabs of the world as clients. So there's a lot of innovation coming out of the Caribbean. Puerto Rico cannot handle all of it, and we obviously look to partner with other jurisdictions that are a little further ahead in terms of friendly regulations that can then work with onboarding of U.S. companies and coexist with best arbitration of laws like Switzerland has had for a long time, and you've had with a number of different U.S. and global entities. Before I get to any questions, any sort of summary thoughts in terms of what you would suggest somebody who is looking at Bermuda to consider in terms of why they should be considering you instead of, say, and I know it's probably going to be regulation and surety and things like that, but any other particular reasons why, companies should be looking at Bermuda as the place that they set up their businesses in the blockchain industry?
From our perspective, we just have a long history of having a very well-regarded jurisdiction. And for the players that are very serious, looking to raise capital from the persons here, our proximity to the East Coast of the United States, and certainly our history lends us in a good stead. The other thing is that you're very rare to find an island like Bermuda, where it's only 20 square miles, 65,000 people. And what I think of the unique thing about Bermuda is that there's many different countries that have innovation labs or accelerators. But we like to refer to our entire island that's only 20 square miles as an accelerator or an incubator itself. It's the ideal place to test your products and services in a controlled environment that you can then scale up those services, products and services to the rest of the world. And you're not going to find a place where you can speak to the leader of the government in real technical terms, and that leader of the government understands it and can make sure to direct the government in a way to help them set up the companies. That's what's been useful for the companies of which we've had coming to Bermuda thus far, and that's going to continue to serve us in good stead as we continue to accelerate the projects of which we have here and make it even more efficient for companies that are looking to set up in Bermuda and to use our platform to be successful.
And I guess the last question before I turn it over to questions from the audience, what's the banking horizon look like in terms of companies that want to bank with either securities or tokenized securities or utility token assets in Bermuda?
From that perspective, we had an announcement yesterday that we have a partnership now with Signature Bank, that any company that goes through our high level of regulation in Bermuda and gets approved for the issuance of a digital asset or gets approved for a digital asset business license will have access to banking services from Signature Bank. Okay, you heard it there first. You get a bank account if you get approved through the regulation there. So that's I think that may be the first in the Caribbean. Well, absolutely. That was actually announced yesterday. We put out the announcement with Signature Bank, so that's hot off the press. Hot off the press, announced yesterday in Bermuda, announced today at the CoinAgenda. So following the history of the CoinAgenda in Europe, where they announced the Prime Minister of Malta announced that their packages there. So we definitely have a history of groundbreaking news here at the CoinAgenda. So questions now, Ben.
If we want to get in touch with you, how do we email, call, anything?
So how do entrepreneurs get in touch with you and/or the people who can make things happen? Yes, I forgot to give the plug, but that's not very good. Everyone can go to www.fintech.bm or send an email to fintech@gov.bm.
But if you go on the website, www.fintech.bm, you'll be able to see all the contact information, all of our legislation, all of our latest news, and make contact with people who are driving this business from day to day.
Fintech.bm for Bermuda.
And the email for what's on?
That's on the site. He has a whole long list of emails there.
Yes,
So,
fintech.bm or fintech@gov.bm.
Yeah. Other questions? Manny, you got any questions? For the Premier of Bermuda? Okay. I asked one of the lawyers who's with NASDAQ. So, fantastic. Well, thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Sorry, one other. Can somebody hand them a microphone? Because I usually go and get it, but I'm on stage now.
So I was just talking to Fundamental Interactions. They have an STO exchange that they say they have a product, and they say that they have an exchange that they're hoping will launch shortly in Bermuda.
That's correct. That's Velocity Ledger. That's what we were referring to.
Yeah. So I guess I didn't know what could we. So do they? Is that? I don't know. How soon do we expect it to launch? I guess is my question.
Well, I think the dates of the launch you'd probably have to ask Velocity Ledger. They're here, but. Oh. I think that might have been what happened yesterday, perhaps. Yeah.
I actually do have a question.
Okay.
Thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. Question: What kind of impact does this have on the economy in terms of what are things looking like in the future in terms of the impact embracing blockchain?
So the Bermuda economy or the blockchain economy?
No, in terms of the Bermuda economy, in terms of having effective regulation with regard to digital assets. I'm curious, what impact do you foresee the economic reality you're facing in terms of the positive impact from it?
Well, fresh from your balanced budget, what impact do you see this new blockchain legislation having on the Bermuda people and the Bermuda economy?
I can answer the question in two ways. The first way is that we clearly will expect a positive impact, but what we want in the Digital Asset Business Act, because it is a regulated entity, there will be physical presence requirements for mine management control. So clearly, when there's more jobs and activity in the economy, you have certainly economic benefits to that. Additionally, I think what's most important, however, is as Bermuda is an international financial services center, we want to be able to make sure that we continue to innovate. One of our main industry in Bermuda is insurance, and so we have a very strong base of insurtech companies that are looking to do things to assist the insurance sector as well. Our view is that digital assets are the future of financial services, and is an international financial services jurisdiction we want to play a part. So this isn't just for economic growth. This is also a part of defense to make sure that we are having the ability to innovate, so to protect our existing industry so they can actually innovate from our shores as opposed to innovating somewhere else.
Okay. And as I recall, the physical presence varies on what type of company it is. If it's just a company issuing a token versus a company setting up an exchange.
Absolutely. Companies that are issuing a token aren't regulated entities. They have to go through an approval process. But so they do not require physical presence. Companies that are operating a digital asset business, such as an exchange and or otherwise, will need to have a physical presence in Bermuda.
Okay. Great. Any other questions for the Premier? Thank you so much. This was very enlightening. I think we got a lot of excited people here, and you'll be hearing, and there's the applause. Thank you, and I'll see you in Bermuda and Hamilton in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Look forward to seeing you here at our Security Token Summit. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye. Okay, so there you go. That's our second head of state that we've had at CoinAgenda. We had, of course, the Prime Minister of Malta in person doing our opening keynote at CoinAgenda Europe last year, and Premier Burt had hoped to be here in person, but as he said, he had to go balance a budget. So, which it looks like he did, and of course, passed the law yesterday that's now allowing banks. So that's cool. In fact, it sounded like if you are passed in Bermuda, you pretty much automatically qualify for a bank account there. So that's, and you know, Giovanni and I had chatted about, you know, ways that impacts companies that raise money there and then basically run the company here. So I guess we'll put our last panel up, Manny. And I have not seen Jacob yet. Jacob, oh, there you are. Come on up. And then, and I have not met yet our third panelist. John. Okay. Oh, he is actually, okay. Can we switch it so we go after that? Because I just thought this would be a good, or do you have to run off any place? Okay, we're going to have you last then before the parties, because I just figure that it's makes a lot of sense to, that one slid a little bit in, so I just want to keep this on schedule, and then we'll have you. Okay. So we just heard from a head of state and a governor, and then this morning was the governor's advisory board head, and it sounds like jurisdictions outside of Washington, D.C. are starting to get friendlier. Is that truth in advertising, or are those the good cops and there's bad cops behind them? They're just going to like say, no, you can't do that. So I guess I'll have everybody introduce themselves and just kind of comment on the general state of things, and if anything you heard today was encouraging or discouraging in terms of just the, you know, what I think we're all looking for, which is, you know, the least amount of hassle to have legitimate, good companies, you know, build businesses in a compliant and yet not ridiculous environment, kind of like you used to be able to do on the internet. So, John, let's start with you.
Oh, thank you very much. Great to be here. Just a terrific day so far. So I'm John Squires. I'm a lawyer at Dilworth Paxson, which is a regional firm based in Philadelphia, New York. In the United States, and I am a technology intellectual property lawyer. Before going to private practice a few years ago, I was chief intellectual property counsel in-house at Goldman Sachs, and we're since the advent of fintech, which now has a nice kind of marketing sounding name. We used to call it, you know, information security and things like that. Helped Goldman obtain their settlecoin patents and have really focused on emerging companies, the regulatory environment that's existing now for distributed ledger, blockchain, and coins. And there's some distinctions that I think we'll draw out in the panel today about coins versus applied technology in the blockchain versus how the regulators look at things and which regulators may look at things depending upon how your company goes about educating the market, pursuing the market, and commercializing your tokens in the marketplace. So I'll leave it at that, and again, great to be here.
Okay. I'm going to actually give a little bit of a pre-intro to Jacob. So Jacob, Jacob is, you know, one of the true OGs in the blockchain legal space. At Perkins Coie, he was the person who, in 2 stints, with general counsel in between at R3, went and really hammered out a lot of the precedents that are still with us today, going all the way back to, you know, defending the Bitcoin Foundation when they're like saying you need a money transmitter license, and it's like, no, we only accept donations, we don't transmit Bitcoin. And I remember that the last time you were in Puerto Rico and had gone out on your own and we're down here visiting a client, I asked really, you know, what's your feel on the market? And you literally, for the first time ever, said, I really can't tell you because I could argue both sides. Do you still feel that way?
Yes. First of all, there were a lot of people at Perkins who did that work. I have been doing it for a long time, and this is a strange time. You know, there's such a state of flux right now. We had the utility token boom and bust, and where it's a complete black box at the SEC. You know, the American regulators keep nipping at the bad ICOs. We know bad ICOs are bad, but they're not telling us anything about whether there's any such thing as a good ICO. In the meantime, you know, as we've heard, there are lots of jurisdictions building frameworks for good ICOs, but that creates this weird world where they might be legal in some jurisdictions and not in others. And as John pointed out, just because something's legal under one legal regime, it could be illegal under others. Tokens can be lots of things. It's all the vogue to talk about securities law now because of security tokens. But back in the day, what everybody worried about was money transmission. That's still a concern. Commodities law is a concern. Tax law is a concern. It's still a mess out there. And one of the things I'm struck by is in 2013 and 2014, at least in the United States, and I don't mean to be U.S.-centric. I'm a U.S. lawyer, so I talk a lot about the U.S. because it's the jurisdiction I practice in. The U.S. state regulation of Bitcoin in particular literally stalled innovation for 2 years. The state of regulation in most states is the same as it was in 2013 and 2014. There's been remarkably little real progress at the U.S. state level, at the U.S. federal level, and in a lot of jurisdictions internationally. So the jurisdictions that are laying out regulatory regimes are really to be credited. So a lot to talk about. Let me stop talking and let the last panelist introduce himself.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Manny Alejandro. I have my own law practice in New York. And I also am the founder of a trade association called the Digital Currency Trade Association, DCTA. And we really founded that trade association because we feel that there's a lack of clarity, a lot of ambiguity in the industry. We had some positive effects last year with regard to some proposed regulation, but with the change of the House of Representatives and new chairpersonship, we're kind of redeploying our efforts to re-engage the House Financial Services Committee because we feel like we do need some regulatory clarity. I think what's interesting to me is if you look at what happened over the last year, year and a half, right? There was this big boom in ICOs. All of a sudden, the SEC gets involved, and as was previously mentioned, the enforcement actions by the SEC were against the most blatantly obvious ICOs. So we didn't learn anything from regulation in terms of when you regulate by enforcement, you try to read what's in the enforcement actions and put together a mosaic, develop a map, because if the regulations are not there to rely upon, you need to look at, well, what is the SEC doing to enforce? But what they've done is, to me, the most straightforward, plain vanilla enforcement actions at a cookie cutter against the most blatant projects. So I think that's been a problem with the industry too, in terms of trying to glean some information from those enforcement actions saying, aha, okay, where there's a lack of clarity with regard to regulation, we could learn from enforcement. Unfortunately, that's not happened. Secondly, I think what the SEC did, and I've been to many conferences, and Chairman Clayton has been there, and whenever he speaks about token offerings, he says, from his perspective, he starts from the perspective that the token offering is a security. And it's important to get in the head of a regulator, right? Because you really need to know what they're thinking. So if he's starting from the premise that it is a security, how do you get him off that it's not a security? That's difficult to do. It's always difficult to move someone away from their foundation, right? But what happened was the SEC effectively sent a chilling effect in the industry, and ICOs just stopped, right? And there is value clearly in the industry and economically with using blockchain technology for utility tokens. Absolutely the case, but we're not in a position where we have the clarity in this country. As such, token offerings moved offshore, which is the worst thing that could have happened from a US regulatory perspective, because I feel that the regulators lost jurisdiction, not gained it. So at the end of the day, they got what they wanted. They, the regulators, sending a chilling effect, slow down with the rampant ICOs and the aggressive pace of ICOs. But what happened? The collateral damage was now these ICOs are done offshore, so they lose jurisdiction. So it's interesting if you kind of think about where we are today. We're in no better position, I think, but probably in a much worse position today than we were a couple of years ago.
So I guess the second question would be, how do we get out of this mess? So we'll stay on the utility token ICO market for just another question or two, then we'll get to STOs. With regards to utility tokens, they haven't gone to zero completely. There's not $1 billion a month, but there might be, I don't know, 10 million, 30 million. I don't think anybody seems to even be tracking them anymore, but they're not zero. We have a few folks talking on Sunday about ICOs. They're obviously like not selling to Americans, but you know, there still is a viable business model, and obviously there's still a $100 and something billion, 129, $30 billion market cap of ones that had previously been ICOs that are still building, still trading, including in the United States and exchanges. And the regulation of exchanges is an interesting area too, but it's not like all of a sudden all the exchanges shut down because there was a lack of clarity. So I guess two-part question. Number one, Wyoming, particularly now with the laws passed this week, the additions, the advent of banking there, still no comment with the SEC. We're going to have at some point ICOs go out in Wyoming. In fact, Ethereum, that's where they're planning on going out. So do you see when the first successful offering goes out that the SEC immediately sues them and Wyoming fights back? Or do you see that if they're not a scam and they seem like everything is legitimate and everything is like, you know, good teams, et cetera, and they've been blessed by Wyoming, that they kind of leave them alone for a little while? Manny.
Oh, it's a great question. Whenever you see in this country, and you've seen this, it's a very common theme where you have lack of regulatory clarity, you see states jump to the forefront. Usually what happens is the federal government falls in line and then they promulgate and effectuate regulation. I'm not quite sure we're going to see that. I think what Wyoming's doing is tremendous. The question is, what else can you do outside of Wyoming? What impact does that have on the rest of the country? So you compare Wyoming to a jurisdiction like New York, where they have a draconian bit license. Think about that. Think of the mindset of the government and the regulatory bodies in Wyoming compared to New York. So how do you actually have multiple jurisdictions competing against each other at the state level where clearly you need some type of federal regulation? I'm not saying I want more regulation, but I believe in federalism. And the problem is that if you have a lack of clarity, you're opening yourself up to potential involvement of the federal government in terms of preemption with regard to federal securities laws. So I think what Wyoming's doing and what Caitlin's doing is tremendous. But the impact, to me, will really be to drive the SEC. But the SEC needs to be driven and pushed, and the CFTC as well, in the right direction. And I think that'll come from the legislative community. I think if you go at the SEC, at that level, the SEC will say, well, we're just doing our job. And look, we slowed down these scammers in the market, we stopped the ICOs. But that's not really effective, right? So you need to raise it to the next level, and who does the SEC deal with? Congress. You need to have Congress push the SEC. We were moving in that direction, but as I mentioned, with the change in the House of Representatives leadership, you know, we're kind of behind right now, and I'm not sure the appetite of the Democrats, in all honesty, to have pro-crypto regulation. So I think we're in a bit of a tricky situation right now in terms of having progressive states like Wyoming with regard to crypto regulation. How does that whole fit in with regard to a federal scheme?
I was going to say you stopped the scammers, but you also stopped a lot of top-tier companies. I mean, there were companies in Silicon Valley with top-tier VC backing that, you know, they got the thumbs up if the lawyers give the okay to do an ICO, and they didn't have to raise another round. They'd get $50 million for pre-selling their product just like they would on a Kickstarter, and not a single Silicon Valley lawyer gave them permission under the current irregularity. And even to go offshore for the most part, and they all just killed their projects. Every single one I talked to killed their projects. I'm going to have you speak next, Jacob, on this. I'm going to add a little twist. Are we perhaps in a situation where we need 8 or 9 more states, like happened with marijuana, before you see that, you know, it's safe to come out and play?
You saw me sort of trying to jump in because I think we may be fighting yesterday's war. I'm not sure that I'm as worried about making the world safe for utility token ICOs as a lot of people are, because let's go way back to, you know, even before Ethereum, you know, Mastercoin, which is I think probably the first token sale as we think about it. You know, that really was a protocol token. So was Ethereum. It really was a token that everybody used in the ecosystem. And you really did have token economics where you had the network effect. All the users were using the token. If the network grew, everybody would benefit. The logic worked. You know, there are not infinite numbers of blockchain project models where you have that effect. For a lot of things, you know, a lot of the models where people were doing token sales, they were bolting on a token so they could do fundraising. And I am not an opponent of token sales. It was a terrific tool. It remains a terrific tool. But in a lot of use cases, it really wasn't the pre-sale of a product, and it wasn't an Ethereum style or a Mastercoin style pre-sale of a token that was going to be used as the network protocol token. And I don't know if 4 or 5 years from now, you know, there's going to be all the energy that people are putting into reworking these same, you know, handful of models. I think that there's so much energy and creativity in blockchain development. We're going to have moved on. I mean, we're already spending all this time and attention on security tokens, and in another 6 or 9 months, we'll be on to the next thing. Which isn't to say that it isn't an important fight, and what Wyoming is doing is terrific. And by the way, I'm going to go further than what Manny was willing to say and say that I don't think the SEC will challenge what Wyoming is doing, and I think it does create a safe haven, and I think it is incredibly important, although it is still high risk. I mean, just because Wyoming says you're okay doesn't mean the feds are going to say you're okay. I guess the point I'm making is I'm not sure that we're going to be as worried about, quote, utility token sales in another year or two. You know, that was 2017. I don't know that it's going to be 2021.
Well, I think that I would agree with you that we're diversifying, and that NFTs, though, would be considered a form of utility token. Stablecoins, on the other hand, would probably be a form of in many cases of registered security, or I'm not even sure which laws they come under, if they're just, you know, basically, you know, Tether-like, you know, just reselling a digitized, you know, dollar in a bank account, or something that represents gold. And these models, you know, obviously need some clarity. Are they securities? Are they commodities? They're one or the other, right? And if they're a commodity, then the CTFC has been pretty clear that, you know, they don't want to regulate every piece of pork. They just want to regulate the trading of efficient markets and pork bellies, right? And so I would disagree that there's not going to be, once Wyoming and other states and maybe eventually the Congress says, here's what is a security and here's what is a product. Because I think it's actually very clear. You're correct. Many people, you know, did ICOs on things that were clearly securities. But many didn't, and even though I don't think that in a changing ecosystem, you can say we're done with the final things ever are going to be Ethereum and Stellar and EOS, and that's it. Nothing else will ever challenge them. Otherwise, we'd still all be playing on Friendster, right, or MySpace. So I think you have to go, and I think that with 2% of the U.S. population and not even 1% of the world population, on a blockchain at the moment, I think there's going to be huge innovation in terms of infrastructure tokens, loyalty tokens, payment tokens, gaming tokens, et cetera, that are all things that you're pre-selling an actual ecosystem that is not going and funding a company per se, but selling a product. And look, you're paying taxes to the government on it. Certain parts of the government, the IRS should be out protesting against the SEC, saying, hey, do you know how much money you just cost us? $4 billion of ICOs going through Cayman that could have been paying 30% taxes in the U.S. if they let us do it in California. California should be, AOC should be in like an uproar, and she's not. Comments? John?
Well, yeah, so very, very interesting things, especially 2 points I want to draw on, and I'm maybe even going to go further than Manny and Jake have. One is you had mentioned, well, it's often unclear which laws apply. That's a key concept because no doubt Wyoming and the SEC are in a collision course. I just was with Caitlin a couple weeks ago at Silicon Slopes, and it was the day I think they got signed into law. Yep. And Caitlin's very vocal. She says, we're coming, Wall Street. We're coming right after you. Well, what are they coming after them on? States and territories, their laws regulate real and personal property. And that's the hook, that's the jurisdictional hook they're looking to pass favorable laws, attract companies along the lines of digital assets. And to the extent those digital assets can be securities, well, the Securities Exchange Commission's jurisdiction kicks in. And if you look at the jurisdictional hook that the SEC has, definition of a security is anything that evidences an interest in something else, which is very constitutional-like in its statement and gives them broad range. So they're never going to give you, there's work afoot with Joe Grunfest at Stanford and some other companies to come up with a reg crypto as a safe harbor, but regulators are not very good at giving safe harbors. So we'll see what happens there. But the collision course that the states are on with the SEC, we'll see how it plays out. They're trying to attract companies on the digital asset side. And then there's the technology piece. Not all tokens are security tokens or should be security tokens. There's a whole utility token economy out there. And I'm going to proffer there's another piece of property right that's self-regulatory and that people should consider. And it's federal in nature, not state, and it's intellectual property and patents. Patents give you the right to do things that you go to jail for if you don't have a patent. It's a monopoly grant by the government. You get to set monopoly pricing in exchange for disclosure of your innovation. You get exclusivity from the government, and you're allowed to order the market. So I'm positing out there that when you have innovative token economies, utility tokens, and functionality, why not file for patent protection? It's disclosure of your system. You'll get awarded eventually in negotiation with the government as to scope, monopoly rights from the US. It's not state regulated, it's federal regulated, and it's transparent. It's a chance to educate the regulators. As Manny said, this is what it does, this is how it looks. We are open book about it. We're just not going to give our proprietary rights away. And by the way, if you happen to love open source, you can do that too. It's not antithetical because you construct access to your system backed by patents that blow up if someone gets aggressive at you, but keeps the open source open. So there's a whole lot of sticks that you get to pull out of the bundle if you take matters into your own hand and equip yourself to kind of come at the property right nature of this by availing yourself in the right instances to federal rights and patents that only you can get. You're the innovator, you're the only one who can apply for it, and they're great vehicles to try to level the playing field and take back a measure of control of what you're doing in the marketplace.
So if the U.S. Patent Office grants you a patent for a particular tokenized utility system, and recognized it as a useful utility system and not a security. Can that be used in your argument if the SEC comes and says, we think you're a security?
Absolutely. In fact, I've had clients ask me, well, why can't I just send a letter to the SEC? Great idea, do that, except your letter is a U.S. patent. You've availed yourself to a companion agency of the federal government, been awarded rights with it. I practiced with Jay Clayton before he went to head up the SEC. When I was at Goldman, he was outside counsel to Goldman. I've written a number of regulatory papers, and the SEC is struggling with it. They don't want to see innovation go offshore. But you know, they had their job. One was to kind of get the fraud out of the market that was rampant in white papers that were unbacked by anything. The SEC tends to look at this as a backed offering, a backed security, if you will. And so it's transparent. It's not a get out of jail free card, but it gives you a heck of an argument to show the regulators, here's how it all works, here's what we're doing, we're a utility token, not a security, and we're certainly not fraudsters because we've invested in the technology to bring it to market, and here's our rights from the government that evidence that.
Here's the challenge with that, though, and here's what's made this such a problem. If there hadn't been the token sale boom in 2017, we wouldn't be having this conversation about whether any token sale was a security. We would all agree it was just like Kickstarter. You're selling a token in advance to give somebody access to whatever the blockchain protocol is going to do once it's released. That's Kickstarter. It's pretty easy to conclude it isn't a security. But once you had mania and hysteria, and you had these, you know, hockey stick curves in value where these things went up off the charts, and it became obvious there was nobody in this room who bought a token in a token sale that didn't do it hoping for this. Or maybe there's one of you, but most of you didn't. I didn't, okay? And that's the truth. On the other hand, John is absolutely right. A lot of the tokens, you know, the fraudulent ones aside, the garbage ones aside, there's a lot of brilliant stuff, deeply innovative stuff, deeply useful stuff. And a lot of the token sales are both, right? It's an incredibly useful product, an incredibly innovative piece of technology, and also an incredibly attractive opportunity to make money, even if it is carefully not marketed that way. And it lets the SEC go either way, because depending, you know, if you squint with one eye, you look at it one way. If you squint with the other, you see it the other way. And that's why, you know, I think all of us have said this one way or the other. The SEC isn't being helpful because all they're doing is telling us that the bad ones are bad, the ones that are obviously fraudulent, or that, you know, say something like this: hey, we're having a token sale. It's an amazing investment opportunity. Come buy our security. Well, that's easy to whack it for being a security. But what the SEC is staying, you know, completely away from is the ones that say, hey, we're a really innovative product, you know, that you can pre-buy to come and use our platform once it's released, with no mention of investment potential, right? And, you know, they're not bad arguments either way, to be absolutely frank. And that's why it's you know, the initiatives like Wyoming's are so useful, because it sort of just bowls through this sort of stasis where you could go either way and sort of gets the clarity. And in the meantime, the U.S. is, as you know, the other folks in the panel have observed, is becoming irrelevant because people are proceeding with token sales. They're just blocking the U.S. And increasingly, it's not just that the token sales are happening overseas, because it used to be you did your token sale overseas, but then everybody wanted to be on Bittrex. You had to be on Bittrex because you really wanted to be able to get it at the Bittrex liquidity pool, and you wanted to be able to be in front of U.S. Bittrex account holders. But, you know, late last year, Bittrex rolled out Bittrex International, and all of a sudden, people stopped worrying so much about being on Bittrex U.S., right? And there are enough of the big Chinese exchanges. You can get on one of those, and now people are satisfied, you know, issuing overseas, block the U.S., get on Binance, get on Huobi, get on Bittrex International. Maybe later you'll worry about Bittrex U.S. And so the U.S. is kind of, as you pointed out, making itself irrelevant. And something kind of, I think, has to happen this year to get some clarity.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I advise companies that I work with, if you're U.S. and you have a utility token model, go to a place like Bermuda's currently my favorite, but Bermuda, Cayman, whatever, who's going to basically let you go in with no, you know, you pass their rules, et cetera. You do your KYC of everything. You block the U.S. You basically go after larger players because you're going to be raising less money now anyway. And you then just do your crowd sale, and then you then distribute the companies. I've gone over the model with Giovanni, and it's encouraging to see that Puerto Rico is now leaning toward emulating Wyoming, but before that happens, you go and you do an ICO in Bermuda, and you then distribute the proceeds of the sale to an operating company in Puerto Rico, software as a service. You pay 4%, zero to Bermuda, you're done. Any questions? I mean, any problems with that one? I mean, it seems like that's fairly bulletproof in terms of SEC proofing.
Yeah, I was going to mention that, you know, I think we're in this situation because we still have a reputational issue, right? I think what happened in 2017 really hurt us badly, and I think that we haven't been able to recover. And as a result of that, we're in a very defensive position. So I'll submit that the ICO, let's say, is a pothole, and what we're doing right now is trying to evade that pothole, either by moving towards STOs or going to other jurisdictions. But if you look at Bermuda as an example, you can effectuate very pro-crypto regulation and have successful projects that are not run by scammers, that are not run by money launderers. So why can that happen in a place like Bermuda but not here? Well, because we don't have the miasma model. They don't have the miasma model that we do here with regard to state regulators, federal regulators, all different types of regulatory alphabet soup fighting each other, challenging each other. So to me, that's why I'm a big proponent of some kind of clarity. Maybe we do need some type of self-regulatory organization and not FINRA. Maybe we do need a true independent SRO who is comprised of individuals that understand the rules. We need to create new rules, but maybe voluntarily before we get there, because that's a long runway to get federal regulation, we come up with best practices. I mean, why can't we do that? I know there's been discussion about that. Why can't we voluntarily say, okay, we agree to live by these standards and jam the regulators and push them? I mean, that's something I think we should consider.
So, really quick, because we're getting near the time, Token Taxonomy Act, dead on arrival in the Democratic House. That's what Caitlin tells me. Dead on arrival?
Probably.
Okay.
But just a direct answer to the question, I think that's brilliant advice that you're giving to your clients.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different, take token or blockchain out of the equation, no different than Microsoft did when setting up its company in Ireland and all the royalties.
And in Puerto Rico. All of their U.S. Cloud revenues come through Puerto Rico. The IRS doesn't get a dime.
Right. And then what happened? Eventually, so much lost revenue, to your point, Manny, they had to get back into the act. But as far as...
Not in Puerto Rico, just in Ireland.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
One closing thought. You know, the counterpoint to the solution is, you know, avoid the U.S., you know, come up with things like Bermuda and, you know, Wyoming and take the risk that the SEC doesn't stare down Wyoming. I'm working with a client that's on the verge of doing a token sale that has as backers Fortune 100 companies, several of them as stewards of its network. It's really quite uniquely situated in that, you know, it is deeply partnered with major companies. And these companies are freaked out about tokens. And you can't tell these companies, hey, don't worry, we're going to go overseas to do our token sale. The only thing you can do to satisfy these companies is to say, well, if we're going to do a token sale, the only way we can do that token sale is we're going to have to go talk to the SEC and get their blessing, or at least get a readout where we can walk out of that room, you know, looking at the staff in the eye and kind of reading body language and concluding it's okay. And that's important, you know, because what's coming eventually is blockchain isn't going to go anywhere unless somebody starts buying blockchain services, which means enterprise starts buying blockchain services. Because right now there's exactly 0 enterprise spending on blockchain, you know, within rounding error, right? And enterprise isn't going to spend money on scruffy, regulatorily suspect blockchain. It's going to spend money on blockchain it feels good about, unfortunately. And so, you know, to some extent, you do have to ultimately satisfy, you know, the nasty overlords and get these things solved. And the solutions of running around the regulators, ultimately, I don't think is a good enough answer, and we have to get it solved.
So until that happens, basically, all enterprises are just going to be Microsoft and IBM, and it's going to be private, and it's going to be just, that's it.
I don't mean that nobody is doing blockchain. IBM has been pimping it hard. I mean, the Super Bowl had blockchain commercials. But there is a, you know this, there's a lot of sensitivity, you know, among Fortune 500 companies about anything that's dangerous from a regulatory perspective. They're very cautious around tokens, and to get them to participate in a token anything is hard. I mean, I'm only aware of 2 major companies that have bought tokens. And to get them over that hurdle is hard. To get them over that hurdle when you're telling them about, well, we're not sure how the U.S. is going to feel about this token sale is even harder. That's the only point.
So let's pivot real quickly to stablecoins and STOs. Facebook and Amazon, will they do a coin this year, and will it be considered a stablecoin?
Depends on what you mean by coin. If you look at JP's announcement with Ripple, it's really not a coin.
They called it a coin.
Right.
But it's a private blockchain, yes.
Private blockchain and a settlement mechanism, interbank.
So in other words, Facebook and Amazon would probably do the same thing?
Probably.
Just even though they're not a bank?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the market education that has to go on. Everything's not a coin. You know, they're utility ecosystems, and they're going to have to spend some time and marketing money to educate.
So it'd be like Venmo with a blockchain. Okay, and then security tokens, the $10 trillion market that doesn't exist. Or at least not anytime soon. There's more exchanges out there now than there are actual security tokens. So what's the next year look like?
So just an observation at the beginning. When people say security token, that can mean one of 2 things at a gross level. The first thing it can mean is what we used to call utility tokens, but now they have to be sold as securities.
Yeah, those are not, that's not it. That's a chicken shit token. That's what my lawyer told me token. No, actually, I like to use Caitlin's definition. She calls them 2 different things, tokenized securities and security tokens. Security token is born on the blockchain. It's where you're basically saying, I'm forming something on the blockchain and it is a security. Tokenized security is I'm tokenizing something that's already a security, like art or real estate or, you know, a REIT or whatever.
I think that the vast majority of security tokens that we're going to see are people taking some economic interest and selling it in the form of a token. I think that's what we're talking about, right? Whether it's tokenizing real estate or tokenizing a company's equity, it isn't taking a blockchain token and calling that a security. And all you're really doing in this instance is doing what we used to do before, but with a new distribution medium that has the advantage of, you know, anybody who's on that particular blockchain platform can buy it anywhere in the world. So it at one level it solves the liquidity problem that private equity has. The problem with all of these platforms, and like there are more security token platforms popping up every day, is 1, right now there are going to be a bunch of islands. Two, you're going to have this information problem. I mean, just because you launch on a security token platform where theoretically anybody could buy your token, you still have the problem of making sure the world knows about your token so they can come and find you. And then three, there are legal challenges in the US and in every other jurisdiction with figuring out secondary markets around security tokens. When, you know, the first one that was sold really was the T0 token. And I don't know.
First one was blockchain capital, I think, BCAP.
True. That's absolutely right. But I guess that's absolutely right. I retract my statement. I stand corrected. I'm thinking about the T0 one because it's a good example of the problem. When you read that offering memorandum, they literally say that before you can transfer this token, if you buy it, you'll have to get an opinion from our counsel, and we will remove the restriction from the token. Now, and that's echoing, you know, when you sell a restricted security, there's literally a legend on the certificate that has to be removed before you can sell it in the secondary market. Jones Day was the law firm. They hadn't thought through how they were going to do that yet. They will. We'll figure this stuff out, but it's going to take 2 or 3 years to figure this stuff out. So it's going to be a while before we have this vibrant, fluid ecosystem where security tokens are whizzing around the world the way I think everybody hopes they will.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the additional complexity is the lockup period. So you do an STO, and then it can't trade in a secondary market. So, you know, if you build a day will come, you see all these markets for the secondary trading of STOs. But because STOs have not been done, we're just waiting for what I'll call the seasoning of them to trade. But they raise a whole panoply of questions, you know, as correctly mentioned, in terms of, you know, how do you actually commence secondary trading? When does it start? How do you get them listed on certain ATSs? There's a big rush to get ATSs. I heard, you know, it's very difficult to get an ATS approved today. So that's even been, you know, slowed down by the commission as well. So, you know, you're just, you know, you're waiting, but you don't really know what you're waiting for. And there's a series of unanswered questions. Those questions will probably become answered closer to the time that the 12-month lockups are over.
So
later into this year.
So we're now going to have yet another market that is going to go offshore. So while people are waiting, they want to wait 3 years for the rules to come into place. You're going to have the Bahamas stock market. You're going to have the Gibraltar stock market. Everyone's going to go and raise money there for the securities. And if somebody in the U.S. wants to buy them, tough luck. Maybe you can buy an ETF of Gibraltar stocks. Questions? All the way down. Let's get you a mic.
Hello, my name is Jose Gonzalez, and I have a few questions regarding jurisdiction and the agencies that claim to have jurisdiction over the ICO, just tokens in general. In 2017, there was a hearing in the Senate, and both Mr. Clayton and the person who runs the CFTC were there, and there was this issue. They were trying to figure out who has jurisdiction over what. And there is a third, lesser-known agency that apparently has claims over this called the CFPB. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. Hopefully you are. And John, earlier you were talking about the jurisdictional hooks that the SEC used to basically lay claim over, basically claim jurisdiction over certain things that were going on in the cryptocurrency space. And I was wondering if you knew of the jurisdictional hooks the CFPB uses there. You guys can pitch in too.
I actually don't know specifically CFPB.
Are you referring to the CFTC, the commodities? No, CFTB. Protection Bureau.
Yeah.
Yeah, the CFPB is the agency that Elizabeth Warren was responsible for before she got elected to the Senate. And essentially, there's questions right now about its jurisdiction and its autonomy. And it supposedly, the confusion is, you know, where does it lie? Supposedly, it hangs above the SEC and the CFTC to some.
That was the one who was supposed to like regulate credit card companies, essentially.
Yes, yeah. It's just it should be like a watchdog type of group. But I think to your question, it was brought up. But you're talking about jurisdictional questions between the SEC, which is pretty clear, and then Chairman Giancarlo for the CFTC, right? So they both have different jurisdictional perspectives in terms of what they're responsible for. But the CFPB, I think, is just a red herring. It just causes confusion.
People think of it as a gotcha when multiple agencies all say, we have jurisdiction over the same thing, and they think, well, how can that be? That actually doesn't bother me, because the same thing can manifest in different ways, right? I mean, to the IRS, it has to figure out how to tax Bitcoin, for example. And all it can do is look under its statute. It's all it has the authority to do, and it was given a relatively few choices under its statute, and the only bucket it could find was to conclude that Bitcoin was property. So to the IRS, Bitcoin is essentially property. The SEC, its prism, John is correct about the very broad possible lens it could look at, but its primary lens for examining things like token sales is the Howey test that we've all become unduly familiar with. So it determines, is it a security by looking at it through that test. The CFTC has its own statutory test. FinCEN examines whether it has jurisdiction by deciding whether it's a money service business. Are you engaged in money transmission if you have a business activity around virtual currency? So, it's the nature of at least the U.S. regulatory environment that you can have interlocking regulatory jurisdiction, and that's just life in the big city. There are other jurisdictions that have a unitary, financial regulator, a single regulator. I wish we did. It'd make my life a lot easier. But the fact that we don't, and that lots of agencies look at it differently, I don't. That's not necessarily big bad government. That's agencies applying the statute they've got to apply.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, and then certainly you can ask these gentlemen all the questions you want at the cocktail party. Pedro.
Hey, I just have a question for you guys. It seems like we got New York, New York, New York in terms of attorneys up there. Close enough. What I'm getting at, what I'm getting at with that is that it seems like we should have a direct connection to the regulators. And I went to a lot of conferences last year. I went like 25 different conferences, and the process of doing so, it seems like this issue just keeps on coming up, and it's not going away. Other places in the globe are lapping us in terms of regulation, and what's happening is clear as day, just like what's happening in Puerto Rico. It's a brain drain. All right, we're taking all of our ideas and all our companies and going overseas because the United States makes it very scary to raise money in. So it has to be some kind of way where people can, like I get it, we have like these old antiquated systems, but there has to be something that can be done where people realize we are literally losing innovation to other countries.
And that's actually what the Library of Congress hearing was about. Unfortunately, it was under a different administration because now the law is going to be dead. So,
our regulators know it, right? I mean, the U.S. regulators, they're not oblivious to the fact that these technologies are incredibly innovative, and they, when you talk to them individually, they all get it. They really do. They also regard themselves, if we're being frank, just like the U.S. properly or improperly regards itself as the world's policeman. The U.S. to a large extent views itself, and the world views the U.S. as the world's financial policeman, and sort of responsible for ensuring financial law and order. And I think the U.S. probably overbalances in favor of, first do no harm, and they maybe worry less about being innovative and worry more about, stamping out problems, whereas other jurisdictions have the freedom to be innovators, to be scrappier. And, I think everybody in this room wishes that the U.S. government would follow suit. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I'll just add, they do get it. Jay taught an investment banking course at Wharton before going on the SEC. So you have to look at what the missions are of the agencies. The SEC is looking to protect investors. And before, from the 1929 stock market crash, there was no SEC, and it was born out of that. So they're protecting the markets by protecting investors. By that measure, they probably did a pretty good job early on by squeezing out some of the fraud in these high-flying white papers that had nothing behind it. Those were easy targets. The more difficult question is, how do you then not have a chilling effect on innovation and the emerging of technologies in markets where the U.S. wants to continue to be the leader and provide an environment. The onrush of technology law is always lagging behind. And again, from my personal standpoint, I advocate self-help. Educate the market as best you can, get out in front of it, engage with the regulators and educate them, and they'll come around. It's a slow-moving battleship, but it'll get there.
Personally, I think they would have protected a lot more investors if they simply arrested people for fraud instead of for a rubber stamp of unregistered security. Because the one that clearly was an unregistered security, the Dow, and people lost up to $60 million, nobody went to jail there. They said this is a learning moment, and yet, that wasn't the fraud, but it was an unregistered security that also had big technology problems, as opposed to the guys that they caught on the plane with fake their entire team was fake LinkedIn things, and they paid celebrities, and they just ran off with the money, and they caught them on the plane headed to South America. That should have been not focusing on, hey, is it a registered security? It's a fraud. Fraud laws don't even, aren't that complex to prosecute. You don't have to find other charges.
Well, in mature markets, it's still, you can't squeeze it out totally. Look at Theranos.
Bernie Madoff.
Exactly. So.
Yep. Okay, so thank you, panel. Sorry, you had a comment on that?
Yeah, just one thing. When I went through security, through the TSA yesterday, when I came in from New York, I have TSA pre-check, so I don't have to take my shoes off. But if you think why we all have to take our shoes off, there was one guy who was the shoe bomber. And think of how much that radically changed the industry. So, there were a couple of bad apples, unfortunately, scammers, and that is reputational damage, and the SEC went after them, and that's kind of, as mentioned earlier, why I think we're in a situation we're in. But, think about that shoe bomber, and think about how much that changed how we travel globally right now. It was one incident. Thank you.
Okay, thank our great panel, and we've got one quick presentation now on innovation in blockchain and El Yunque, our natural wonder of the island. Keenan, come on up. Yeah. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. You put me in a tough spot. You put me between, first you put me after Your Excellence and Your Highness, and then a group of people complaining about the federal government, and here I am, a person that works for the federal government. Is the slide up yet? Okay. So while I'm talking specifically about El Yunque, I really want you to kind of frame this as how can you do partnerships with, unorthodox partnerships with governments in themselves. So I'm Keenan Adams. I work at El Yunque National Forest. And my background's in wildlife biology and forestry. But I'm here today to really talk about these unorthodox public, private, or nonprofit partnerships that can potentially be forged. And I really want us to try to think about how can, in two ways, how can you leverage the finances you may have gained in the crypto world, but also how can we leverage the blockchain technologies. So why should you be interested? Well, we have a pretty unorthodox concept at El Yunque, and I think there's an opportunity for us to really partner. So here you are, a group of unorthodox people saw something, and was able to capitalize on it. And here I am, working for a forest who did something really unorthodox in the way we planned. We're pioneers in our own ways, and I think there's opportunities for us to talk about these overlaps. We really changed our paradigm at El Yunque from thinking about ourselves as resource managers and keeping the community out to where we're really focusing on engaging the communities and how can we manage the forest to actually help the well-being of these communities. And the pillars of our forest plan are defining recreation, access, and tourism. So we're really focusing how can we use tourism to help out these local communities, but also partnering with these community-based organizations. And I'm going to talk about where I see this community fitting in with these. And I'm here because I really want to have early engagement with this group because we're in the part where we're doing construction, we're putting out bids. And I think the time is now to actually have conversations if we're interested in really having some type of dynamic partnerships. So previous condition, El Yunque is very unique. It doesn't really fit the mold. Typical forests have, big timber programs and a lot of wildfires, and this doesn't really happen in the Caribbean. We're also relatively small, 29,000 acres. And for federal budget allocation models, we're really underfunded. And this led to infrastructure that was in really, really bad shape prior to Maria. Maria really set us back. Really devastated the forest infrastructure, also devastated us ecologically. I'm not sure if you've seen pictures, but I really encourage you to look at how the forest was essentially denuded. There are no leaves left on the trees. But with this comes an opportunity. So through federal appropriation, we received $60 million in supplemental funding to help with recovery. And this is going to help us rebuild. And I don't say this lightly because there was so much suffering with Maria and the island of Puerto Rico, but to some extent there was, as Michelangelo mentioned earlier, an opportunity in this. So here we are, we redid a forest plan. We're really focusing on these local communities and leveraging the forest rather than managing the forest for multiple use to try to make everybody happy. We're really focusing on how can we take this forest and increase the well-being of these communities. A storm comes, which pretty much gives us a clean slate to start over. And so a lot of this dilapidated infrastructure, we now have funding to actually fix it. And we're really focusing, one of the problems also is the local community's liquidity. So we have a lot of local businesses and folks, but they don't have the capital for potential partnership investments. And so I think there's an opportunity for folks such as yourself to come in with a small investment to bring that liquidity, but then also then employ those businesses. And I'll show you this model later. But also, how can we leverage blockchain technology in itself? I think there's opportunities. We have a few problems, such as our transportation system, such as our visitor and crowding, and even talked with Luke back there the other night about how can we, decentralizing this blockchain technology so we can actually give the community a voice and how money or funds are allocated if we were to raise money through nonprofits. I don't pretend to be an expert in blockchain. I'm one of those people that actually, I'm on the front side of the curve. I see the value in it and I see the potential of it, and this is why I'm here, because there's a lot of creative people in this room that could potentially help with ideas of how to leverage blockchain. Just quickly, why is El Yunque special? Cultural identity for Puerto Ricans. The legend of Juquiju, which is the part of the creation story where El Yunque came from, and the myth is that the Juquiju lives in El Yunque Mountain, and Yunque actually means white. This is symbolic of the clouds that surrounds the mountain. Huge biodiversity, but what really matters is there are 1.2 million visits per year at El Yunque. It's the second most visited place on the island. It accounts for roughly 20% of the GDP for the Puerto Rican tourism economy. So 1/5, that's just a huge chunk. It's like El Moro and then El Yunque. Everybody's been to Old San Juan. But it's one of those things, how many times are you going to repeatedly go to Old San Juan as a tourist, whereas El Yunque has a lot of potential for repeat visits. And we have actually 400 to 500,000 folks coming to the visitor center, and that's when it was in pretty outdated conditions and pretty dilapidated. We really changed the concept of how we're going to look at the visitor center, less static and more dynamic. Think about a museum that's changing its curation. So here we are, we have a place where we can bring a lot of people in, get a lot of exposure. Imagine if we had some type of interpretation of the blockchain technology. We can then, 1.2 million people, educate them on what blockchain technology is and how it can be used in very daily lives. And how many times has the federal government approached you all to say, hey, how can we leverage blockchain technology? So I think, again, another opportunity for us. So we had 1.2 million visits when we were not reaching our full potential with infrastructure, really dilapidated and old and outdated infrastructure. So we're expecting to have way more visitation once we get the site up and running. And we really want to develop first-class facilities at a world-class site. The model's pretty simple. We're going to invest baseline plus. So we're going to bring water, we're going to bring power to these facilities. And then there's a bunch of small recreational facilities that can be leveraged. We're looking for people, for partners for capital investment, small capital investments in those facilities. And the whole concept is to then employ a local business. So we're working with a nonprofit called Vitrina Solidaria, who are actually developing the capacity of those businesses. And so the employment capital, the human capital is going to be there. Those businesses are going to be there. We talked about an example of, believe it or not, firewood. There's a bunch of old infrastructure with fireplaces in the tropics, but it's pretty cold when you get up in the elevation. So how can we potentially work with the local person on delivering that firewood for those businesses or for the glamping potential that we have at El Yunque? We're going to try to make this happen in about 2 years. I already put out a bid for a design build contract 2 days ago for our visitor center. So things are moving. We're already turning some shovels on, and heavy equipment's moving already on smaller projects. And we're looking to start small. We're not looking to have huge partners making huge investments. We really want to start small and scale up. And then there's also leveraging $67 million with grants, partnerships, and sponsorships. So even if you're just feeling generous, you want to say, hey, I just want to help. I don't want to do anything. I just want to write a check. Then you can do that as well. Why is this exciting? So I commissioned a study when I was here. I failed to mention I was here right after Maria leading recovery for natural and cultural resources for the entire island as a representative for the Department of Interior. And we commissioned a study to look at how can we help rebuild the economy leveraging these cultural and natural resources. And we picked 5 sectors because right now the current tourism model is really focusing on cruise ship traffic. And so we're realizing Puerto Rico has not reached its potential for tourism because of the focus on cruise ships. People go into San Juan, they take a tour, they're here for a couple hours, they're back in and out. We're really trying to get people to stay here longer. So what's the alternatives, right? And so we talked about adventure tourism, ecotourism, agro-tourism, cultural tourism, and gastro-tourism. This is the predictive modeling that we produced afterwards. We commissioned a group from MIT and Harvard to do the predictive modeling. And as you can see in the northeast corner where El Yunque is located, El Yunque is that big white spot. You don't have potential for tourism development when something's protected, but all in and around it, there's a bunch of potential. And we did some more predictive modeling based upon these variables that were listed here, and it shows that pretty much the region that El Yunque is the #1 region for predicted growth in tourism. So we're leveraging the right spot. We already have high traffic, and we're going to continually have more traffic. And this is where I see blockchain really helping solve the problem because we have a huge crowding issue and we have transportation issue. At the moment now we have, maybe 250 parking spots for a lot of people coming in and out. So we're going to have to sooner or later go to a transportation system. But how can we potentially use coins or tokens or token systems or blockchains to really help address that problem? And I think it's possible. Just people you're going to work with. Boss is Sharon Wallace, lady in the hard hat, really visionary person. The guy jumping is our engineer, William Medina. He's part of the Puerto Rican diaspora. He could be working anywhere else, but he chose to come back after Maria to really help. Same thing with Delisa Padilla, happens to be my wife. She's a community engagement lead at El Yunque. And we have David Isle, really good recreation person. And then Pedro Rios is the guy standing in the white shirt, is the heart and soul of El Yunque that really helped lead the efforts for recovery, or led efforts for planning. The key is focusing, so the Puerto Rican government has been focusing on this northeast side of the island. I'm sure you've all heard of Roosevelt Roads and the redevelopment there. This El Yunque is, and when we talk about development, we're talking about sustainable development. We're not talking about depleting your assets. The only thing that's been holding up the northeast side of the island has been El Yunque, Section 936, I'm sure you're all aware of. really impacted the plants and the factories, and then Roosevelt Road shutting down. So El Yunque is what's been propping it up, and the Commonwealth government has recognized the importance of this side of the island. They're really trying to focus on doing redevelopment in that area. In addition, the Puerto Rican Foundation for Puerto Rico is really focusing on tourism, trying to extend the nights. And then they developed the DMO, the Destination Marketing Organization. So there's been focus from a governmental, local government standpoint, from nonprofit standpoint. And I mentioned these two studies I commissioned, one with the MIT and Harvard group, the other one with Megan Epler-Wood, who's the world's leader on ecotourism, and she did an analysis too. And more or less, they all pointed to the Northeast region being the place to be. So there's a lot of data and predictions, and also initial government inertia moving in that area. And so how to get started, really want to have a conversation about, if you're interested, just give me a call, drop me an email. I want to make sure our values are aligned. As I mentioned earlier, the model is we're making baseline investments, small capital investments from partners, and then and from there, we really want to employ local people. The whole intent is for us to help the well-being around the community, and that's our value set. And so if your values are aligned with that, I'd really be interested in talking with you. If you just want to help out and say, I believe in what you guys are doing, I'm not looking to invest in this, I would say contact Mark Shelley, and he's a person that can help facilitate any type of help. And the reason I have the bus and the visitor center there is that's where I think the blockchain technology can really help us in managing a problem. And I think it'd be really cool if we're able to partner and show the potential of this technology in solving governmental problems to 1.2 million plus people annually. So just wanted to be respectful of your time because I know I'm between you and your cocktails. So just thanks, Mike, for inviting me, and thank you very much. Oh. Yeah, and it has a billion-dollar view too. That oversees the look of the Caribbean. It's in the canopy. Really, really fantastic architecture.
Hey, would that qualify as an opportunity zone? No.
Yeah, wouldn't. But there's a lot of opportunities surrounding the forest. So we saw. We actually invested in a small little de facto visitor center, which is going to provide a really good opportunity. We're going to be out in 2 years, so another entity wants to come in. I think that'll be a really good example. So right at the edge of our boundary, it is. And I think there's a lot of opportunities for businesses, ecotourism, et cetera. Yeah.
So there's amazing hello? Yeah, there's some amazing undeveloped properties on the island. I was, just before CoinAgenda started, I went to the opening dinner of yet another conference going on this week. It wraps up today. It's the Kinetic Conference, which is a new fund out of Puerto Rico. And they took over the Museo de Arte de Puerto Rico on De Diego, and they had a really beautiful dinner with Mario Pagan, one of the top chefs on the island. And they unveiled plans for they're going to actually take the Bank of Spain, the Bank de España, which has been closed for almost 100 years. It was like operating, it was the biggest bank on the island in the 1800s. It closed like in 1913, and it literally has been sitting empty. And they bought it, and they're going to turn it into a private club for like Act 20, Act 22, people on the island or whatever, people in the fintech industry. And they commissioned an artist who I'd actually met as a friend of Roberto Toledo's at his home, at his mother's home in Guaynabo, and they're taking this talented artist and tying him up for 2 years, and he's going to do a 900 square foot fresco like this. You know, they haven't done frescoes since the Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel. I think it's about half the size of what's in the Sistine Chapel. And it's going to be on the side of the building. It's going to take 2 years. One, like, fresco tile that if you screw up, you have to spend an entire day doing the next tile again. And it's going to be a mural of Maria before, during, and after.
Wow.
So it's going to be quite stunning, 33 feet high. And so that's some of the opportunities on the islands. I mean, that was an empty building that now is going to become a top international private club.
Yeah.
So.
And we have plenty of those decommissioned, or not decommissioned, just dilapidated sites.
So I hope that everyone learned more about Puerto Rico. This is the most Puerto Rico-heavy CoinAgenda Caribbean we've had. But hey, we did have two government leaders as well, a premier and a governor, and then someone from our own governor's office. And and people from the island. Hopefully, you now know more about your own island and some of the opportunities here. So let's go to the party. It's at the boardwalk, just out by the